Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Free Assange Vigil. My name is Taylor Hudak, and I am joined by my co-hosts this evening, Andrew Smith and Steve Poikonen. So some stats for you guys. As of today, it is 55 days until the start of the second round of Julian Assange's extradition hearing. And it is day 3,395 of his illegal and arbitrary detention. And it is 348 days since the trafficking of Julian Assange from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison in London. And as for Chelsea Manning, today is the 13th day that she has been released from federal custody. Before we get into the news of the evening and discuss what took place earlier today in court in London, I do want to introduce to you all a returning guest to the vigil, Krish Mohan. Krish is a politically involved comedian. Krish, it's really great to have you back. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me back. I'm surviving. I've become half robe as a person. This is how I'm surviving through the quarantine, is just wearing a robe 24/7 till we are released, till all of our demands are met. I will be wearing this robe nonstop. It's not going to be healthy. I am going to be at the height of comfort, though. That's what the important thing is. But it's not the healthiest choice that I've made. But I'm sticking to it. So. But I'm surviving through the quarantine. How are you guys doing with all of the craziness that's going on?
I mean, at the very least, we're surviving, I guess would be the way to put it. Most of us are still happy, healthy, with healthy children, so that's a blessing.
Excellent. That's good to hear.
How about you, Steve?
Oh, I mean, it's at best controlled chaos in my world anyway. So, this just adds one more element to that. I've got two high school age kids and a kid who's in elementary school. And the teenagers are like just ready to go Lord of the Flies at any given moment. They don't understand why they don't get to go and hang out and fuck off and do whatever they want. And yeah, the little one, we can at least be like, go outside and run around the house until you fall over. And be like, okay, I'll do that. So that's helpful. But man, I sitting back and watching 100% of what was left of our agency, autonomy, and liberty be yanked away from us under the guise of we've got a virus. It is a pretty fascinating thing. I didn't have coronavirus in Apocalypse Bingo. I didn't, and I'm feeling a little left out.
I don't think any of us did. I feel like this thing kind of. Well, at least to me, like I was still on the tail end of my tour when everything kind of went to shit, and it seemed like it just went to shit overnight. Like I literally, everything was kind of okay. Everybody kind of knew that this thing was going on, and then I woke up like on March 12th or something, and everybody was like, "We gotta cancel everything. Lock your doors. You gotta put up the Saran wrap on your windows." Saran wrap your elderly too. Just wrap them all in there. Just protect everybody. It was like, it just all went to a crazy to this crazy level very quickly. And then each day was just something new that just kept coming up. So I think we'll be okay. We just kind of need one of those very effective things. A plan, I think, is what we need. We need a plan, and I think we'll be okay. So that's what I'm hoping for.
So what I really hope to see out of all this is independent creators really driving home hard, like, don't go back to work. Like, use this as our general strike. It couldn't have happened better, the way that they picked us all up out of our jobs, dropped us at home, and then we're like, okay, figure it out. And I think this would be a great opportunity to actually leverage the power of the working class to say, like, we have demands that need met before we're willing to walk back into your factories.
I think you're absolutely right, and I hope that we can somehow coalesce under these circumstances that we're in, because the stimulus that they're trying to give us is virtually crap. like you can give every American citizen in this country $1,200, but if you're not going to put a moratorium on all of the debt that's out there, all the mortgages and the rent, then we're not doing anything to really help alleviate the stress and the concerns and the fear that the American working class have, that we're going to get through this okay without this total financial meltdown. And if we're not going to protect the people that need to be protected, then I think you can give people $1,200 all day long. It's still not going to mean a good goddamn much if that $1,200 is a stopgap measure that's just going to go back into the banks. It's going to go back into paying off debt and paying off student loans and all this shit, while we don't really have an income to get us through all this. So it just comes as a half measure at best. And really the Republicans coming out in the very beginning and calling for things like universal basic income I never thought I would actually see the day that happened.
Well, it's a Cato Institute policy, actually. So it's a far right-wing policy, the universal basic income, at least where it came from initially. Not initially, but the people that pushed it, like Andrew Yang, for example, his universal basic income platform was almost word for word the way that the Cato Institute rolled out, hey, let's get rid of all social programs and institute $1,000 a month to everyone.
I didn't particularly think that his plan was the best version of universal basic income. And every time I say this, there's always people from the Yang Gang that want to just berate, badmouth me to the best of their ability. Like I've gotten attacked online, not like threats of violence, but just people calling me an idiot. But I just don't think it's the best version of UBI, but it was the version of UBI that you could pitch to a conservative and say that this is a good idea. Look at the way that we would do this. When really, to me, I think Social Security and all these social programs that we have in place, that's the baseline that you start from, and then you build up from there. That to me is a little bit more rational and compassionate if you're going to instate something like UBI. But even then, like $1,200 is, I mean, depending on where you live, if you live in like New York City, $1,200 is nothing. It's like that'll get you through a week. Where I am in Pittsburgh, $1,200 might be enough for a month, but that's another thing that things like UBI bring into question is, why are there different property values in different parts of the country? Why aren't we just working off of one just general property value idea? Wouldn't that be the right way to do it? But that's part of the reason why they're scared, is because it dynamically shifts the conversation and completely changes the paradigm of the way that we look at our economy and look at the way that we just treat each other in general. So, and it is kind of crazy.
In terms of, I don't know if I agree with that 100%, because the modern GOP has a lot of the same fundamental thought processes and ideology as the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And what we're seeing in terms of this slow rollout of, soft martial law, of a kind of universal basic income, even going to digital currency, a nationalization of industry in order to help us get through this crisis, that's National Socialism. It's different from, Marx's socialism, because the workers don't get the means of production. National Socialism, as conceived in Germany in the 30s, and as they're debating in Congress right now, is the marriage of economic fascism, the merger of corporation and state, and the kind of state capitalism that existed under Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. The money primarily is going to stay with the predator class, and we will then, in order to receive our money, we will go to work for a nationalized industry. We will have our UBI or our payments tied to our compliance, our social credit, And this is going to be speculation right here, but I really do believe there's going to be some sort of actual test as to whether or not you had the coronavirus before you're allowed to receive a UBI payment, or you'll have to get a coronavirus vaccine before you'll be allowed to be eligible for a UBI. Now, that's speculation on my part. These conversations are taking place. People that are within the halls of power that are discussing these things right fucking now. And to me, that's cause for alarm.
Yeah, and that was one of those things. I pointed this out in the video I put out today. Is the average working class is not at the bargaining table when it comes down to them making legislation and putting out these stimulus packages or writing bills on our behalf. Like, we are not there truly represented. And you can make the argument that, well, that's why we vote these people into office. That's why we have senators and House of Representatives and all that other stuff. But are they, though? I think we can time and time again just constantly see them making legislation that helps out more corporations. I mean, the first thing they did was put $1.5 trillion into the banks and bail them out. And now they're talking about another half $1 trillion or something along those lines for the airline industry. And I can tell you that I had to cancel 2 flights that I'm not going to get refunded. They're giving me flight credits. So they're not losing any money right now. And all of a sudden they need, $500 billion in bailouts. And it's crazy.
And even if they go bankrupt, right? The airplanes still exist. The runways still exist. Like, the only thing that goes away is the predators at the top that no longer have control over the distribution of air travel.
Right, and not only that, but the CEOs of these airline companies probably make enough money that they don't really have to worry about, going hungry. And even if you look at it, if they take 10% of their pay, 10% of what they make, and redistribute that throughout their companies, everybody would be taken care of, and they would still be bananas fucking rich, right? They would still be insanely rich if they lost 10% of what they made and reallocated to their people, instead of asking the government for a check, when really the government should be there as social protections for the people, for us, and to value our lives. And it's, there's more and more proof that the American working class is the thing that drives the economy, regardless of which economy you're talking about, right? Is no one's going out there to make investments. No one's buying stocks. No one's looking at real estate or any of that crap. We're all scared, and we're hyper worried now where our next plate of food is going to come from. So of course the economy is going to tank because no one's buying into it. And why would you? There's no point in buying into it right now.
And with the airlines too, even when they got their tax cuts and had cash flow of billions of dollars, all they did was stock buybacks. Right. They had the resources to weather this. And instead of acting in a way that is reflective of a capitalist system, they decided to buy all their stock back. And now that they are collapsing and failing because of their inability to prepare, it's now up to our collective government to bail them out when they were irresponsible in the first place, buying all these stocks.
Yeah, and the
if
treatment.
If they had just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, this wouldn't be a problem. Regular working Americans are being told, you should have a rainy day fund. You should have saved better. You should have done this. You should have done that. Now shut up while we bail out the people who tanked the economy, the people who weren't prepared for this, the people who treated Wall Street like it was a goddamn casino. These irresponsible sociopathic bastards need your help, and we're going to give them your help without your consent.
Well, look, I don't want anybody to be touching any sort of bootstraps. We don't know where these bootstraps have been. Nobody should be touching any sort of shoes. If you're going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, wear some gloves. Put some sanitizer on those straps. Okay? if you even have the luxury of boots. Not all of us.
And of gloves at this point.
Yeah, the glove market. That's the market you got to buy into, people. Is you got to buy into that rubber glove market.
So I want to catch you up on a little project that I've been working on here, because I gave up on federal level politics and state level politics for the most part. So as soon as like all the craziness and the shutdowns and everything started happening here in Ohio, I started calling city council people and mayors and all this stuff, and I said, hey, we need to get municipal farms, not gardens, but your Parks and Rec department are being laid off because no one can go to the parks or the recreation centers. So use them as a resource to start ripping up all of the fields throughout the city that the city owns around these parks and in vacant lots and all this stuff. And build a farm for people. So that way they can see an equitable, sustainable, substantial response. So that way they don't have to worry about where their next meal's coming from. And I actually today received a phone call from one of the poorest cities in my county, and they said, hey, we're really interested in getting this started, and had talked about it internally to the point that they were trying to figure out at this point water distribution and how they were going to water their crops that they were planning on starting to grow. And so I think that's a really cool idea, because to me, if we can find a way to secure a municipal food source, when they reopen these factories, people can say, well, I don't need to go back to work. We already have a moratorium on rent. Right. I have food. Like, what do I need this government factory to do for me that I'm not already doing for myself? So I'm trying to use it as a way to build local community-based power, but at the same time, make sure everyone can eat. And it started to grow legs at this point. Like I sent out emails to like 125 different municipal leaders, and at this point, at least one person from every city has said, hey, I'll champion this for you. I think it's a really cool idea.
A lot of it right now is, or rather, I think it has to be community driven. That's primarily where we're going to come together, and that's primarily where I think you're going to see a lot of change being driven out of. It has to come from the bottom up, because I think when you start looking at top down, they're all worried about their investors. They're all worried about their donors more than they are, people on the ground level. But that's part of the reason why I think going and talking to city council members or, local city elected officials, that's going to make a large amount of difference, rather than trying to get someone like Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer to make these large paradigm shift level changes, where if you can, use your recreational spaces as community gardens and help feed. I mean, that's what the Black Panthers did in the 60s. And which is ironically is what I would say is once that stuff starts happening, that's when the intelligence community comes in and tries to disrupt and break it apart and use their covert operations on average citizens, right? Because that's what they did with the Panthers when Bobby Seale got his survival plan, and it started to spread across the country, and it was effective and it was working, and they were like feeding hundreds and thousands of kids every single day. That's when it became trouble. That's when J. Edgar Hoover really ramped up COINTELPRO on the Black Panther Party itself. Was during that thing.
And so my hope too, because that's something that we're intimately aware of, like the power and influence and infiltration of the intelligence communities. They now have to try to find a way, if they're going to stop this before it starts, to, in the middle of everything else that's going on, have to come to this little podunk county in the middle of Ohio and try to stop cities from building farms. So part of it, I guess, part of my strategy in the larger perspective is like, I'll give them a run for their money. Like if they want to go do all this crazy shit, like I'm going to start some farms, because the moment that they have to turn and look at me is the moment that they're not paying attention and have to take resources off of these other things at a time of limited manpower, of separation, of isolation. So it's just, I don't want to call it like the game, so to speak, but it's a way of pulling the eye of the people influencing its society away from the larger players So that way, if they try to interrupt me doing this farming operation, they might miss something else that insert person is doing on this part of the world. So my hope is, if we can get people doing it independently, completely independent of each other, they don't have a central power system to go after. They have each individual city that they have to try to figure out at this point in the middle of everything else happening.
I wasn't saying that to like discourage the idea or anything. Yeah.
Oh, no. It's a strategy thing for me. Like, it's part of the larger like edifice of what I try to do is think about how they would have to respond to what I'm trying to do in relation to what the fuck else is going on.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like once you kind of learn about things with history, it's you get to implement it in a more interesting way. I think like once we learn like, oh, what have we done that hasn't that did work, and how was it stopped? Like, why aren't we seeing the Black Panther survival programs being used today? Is you should know that they're the intelligence communities have no interest in community driven action. They have no interest in it, and they want you to kind of believe in a centralized government is going to take care of you. When I mean, right now we had a week-long argument about how much money should be in a direct check to the American working class, and there was zero argument about how much money they just have to make up for Wall Street, right? Like there was an interview where the guy was like, we just moved a decimal point in the computer and then boom, we made up more money.
And they're giving Jimmy Dore covered this. They're giving $14 trillion, $1 trillion a day for the rest, not in a literal sense, but $1 trillion a day for the rest of the month to these banks. Why not give $1 trillion a day to the American people? Why not give $1 trillion a day to the people most affected so they can pay their bills and can keep these banking institutions open? But instead, they just want to throw the money at the very top and then have it trickle down and make everyone's lives better.
Yeah, that would be the hope.
To put that into a little bit of perspective here real quick, if you're watching now and you think that federal taxes is what funds federal spending, or if you think that your hard-earned tax money goes to supporting the military or infrastructure, like that's absolutely false. That's 100% false. Money comes from keystrokes on a computer that get entered into ledger accounts at various Federal Reserve banks, and then those funds are available. That's it. Traditionally, it requires a House Senate Appropriations bill and a signature from the president, but we have fiat currency. We are not tied to anything. We went off the gold standard in 1972. We use what's referred to as the petrodollar to kind of peg value onto our currency, but our currency isn't directly tied to oil. It is fucking imaginary. We had, since October, over $5 trillion poured into Federal Reserve banks, most of which went immediately to stock buybacks, like Andrew had mentioned earlier. It is faith-based. It is 100% imaginary. And for the federal government to make the claim that we have to bail out industry before we can address our citizens, or make the claim that we don't have the money to do this, that is an outright fabrication. And if you've been watching any of this play out, you have to know that on some level. There has to be some sort of like intrinsic knowledge that our monetary system is faith-based. And yes, they do have all the money in the world to pay for all the things that they're telling us they can't. That alone should be reason enough to general strike.
Yeah, man. There's a religiosity around money in this country. Is people worship it, especially now when you have people coming out and saying that they should sacrifice themselves for the economy. It's like, didn't we get over the whole human sacrifice thing? like wasn't that something we were like, that doesn't seem like a great idea? It seems like the more we sacrifice people, the less we have people to do things like farm and cook and build buildings and shit. Maybe we should stop sacrificing people.
In the advent of automation, it makes sense for a brutal totalitarian government to want to kind of thin the herd a little bit. This coronavirus magically only goes after the parts of the population that are collecting Social Security, about to collect Social Security, on Medicare, or about to collect Medicare. It takes out all of the high-risk pools and leaves alone future generations of workers. I'm not suggesting that's the point. I'm saying it's one hell of a remarkable coincidence that in terms of who's getting this thing, it is exactly who, not just the president, but the presumptive Democratic nominee, the pre-selected Democratic nominee, are both on record saying they want to take funds away from these people. They want to cut Social Security. They want to cut Medicare. Now, at the dawn of an automated workforce, here we have a virus that wipes out all of the people who are going to ostensibly drain that system. It's fascinatingly coincidental to me.
Yeah, the whole thing. I mean, Biden's a whole mess of everything. It's just every time he talks, it's just none of the sentences come out right. And more than anything, like whenever he talks, I'm just like, this guy's cognitive function is failing, and we should just let him lay down. Has anyone just let Joe Biden lay down for like 15 minutes? Have we talked about this plan? Because he might need it. And I don't believe that Joe had disappeared because he was afraid of the coronavirus. I think the reason why Joe Biden disappeared is because the CPU needed to be adjusted, and what they were doing is importing some of the programs from Pete Buttigieg over into Joe Biden, and that's a 2 to 3 day process, to do all that sort of data transfer. So it's just that's the only thing that makes sense. It's the only thing that makes sense.
Completely satirically, I'm pretty sure that Pete Buttigieg was the first person to get the Neuralink that got put onto a national platform. And then they were like, wow, this works great. He won Iowa. So they plugged it into Joe Biden, and he just had too much brain plaque, and it's just misfiring everywhere to the point that he now can't even form a sentence more than 3 words long without going, oh, I did it again.
Yeah, and
he was on MSNBC with Nicole Wallace, and Nicole Wallace is one of the more well-paid stenographers to power at NBC. She doesn't make the Maddow money, but she makes good money. And Biden was on there just trailing off and losing it, flat out melting on camera. And she had this look on her face, like she was trying to smile through it, but she knew that she had just got the phone call that Grandpa is naked in the freezer aisle at Safeway again. And maybe we should, somebody's got to come pick him up. And this time, don't take him home. Take him to the hospital. That's the look that she had on her face. And this is the person that the Democrats want to lose to Donald Trump, or even better, want to beat Donald Trump, because there is no one more malleable or programmable than Joe Biden. He'll go out and sell the wars. He'll go out and sell the austerity. He'll go out and sell every atrocity imaginable and have no memory of doing so after the fact.
Steve, that's a great point.
Oh, no,
yeah, he's an ideal candidate, Joe Biden, because those around him can completely control him, and they want somebody who is clueless like that. And that's a fantastic point. We've talked about this with Reagan during his second term. Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, you brought
I
up
cut you off
exactly
there.
what I was going to bring up is I think Reagan was the ideal candidate for the intelligence community, because I think Reagan had dementia as he was going into office, and it just got worse. And initially, I thought up till Super Tuesday, my thought was Pete Buttigieg was that candidate, because he was kind of the blank slate to put whatever foreign policy you want on him. You had a bunch of CIA spooks. You had former directors of the CIA, former National Treasury officials that were all giving Pete Buttigieg the thumbs up. And it was very strange. And they were endorsing him and putting money into his campaign. And it was like, why would these like so many people that were part of the intelligence community put so much of their faith and their backing into somebody that we literally hadn't heard of until this election? You know, you have so many other people that you could back. You had Biden on the stage. You had Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar. They could have backed any of them, but he seemed like the ideal candidate for them because he was such a blank slate. You know, he would just say whatever they needed him to say. Oh, sure, this random guy is the president of Venezuela now. Great, yes, let's just do that. That seems fine. And once I think Pete wasn't able to, this might go into conspiracy theory level, but my thought process was he wasn't able to take down Bernie with a significant lead in Iowa. So they kind of figured, well, this guy's probably not going to do it, and eventually had to veer back to plan A, which was Joe Biden all along. And Taylor, you're absolutely right. I do think that this is sort of a Reagan reboot where they're like, we have all of these things. We have to take care of Iran. We have to take care of Venezuela. You know, the Trump administration failed. Bolton and Pompeo failed to start wars in those countries. So let's just put somebody in there that's going to be the perfect kind of mascot for this sort of stuff. And that's kind of what Joe Biden is at this point. Like, the dude's brain's turning into mush in front of everybody's face, and there's still people that are like, this guy's electable. And it's like, this guy needs to retire. Like, we have to let him go.
He's a lump of fucking clay with hair plugs. That's what he is. He's like a partially reanimated corpse who's, occasionally fed talking points that he sometimes puts together in the same sentence, right? But really, the only time you get a coherent sentence out of Joe Biden is when a woman comes up to him and talks to him about his record. And then he can rattle off a lot of complete sentences, and most of it is, you don't know shit, honey. And like that's about the sum total of it. That's his whole campaign, yelling at people who have questioned his record or have brought up his record out loud to him. That's when he's on point.
A friend of mine actually pointed that out and said that that's actually a symptom of dementia is that you can remember stuff from like 15, 20 years ago, but you can't remember stuff from, breakfast that morning. So, I mean, you're looking at somebody that probably has early stages of dementia. And a couple of people have called out the Democratic Party for elder abuse, which probably, right? Like let grandpa lay down. And I know I'm going to shoot myself in the foot by saying this, but as much as we have an age, like you have to be 35 to run for president, I think once you hit like 58, you can't run for president anymore, right? Like we move, and we should probably drop the age too. Like, let's say 31 to 58. That's the perfect age for you to be a president, right? Like, and I know I'm shooting myself in the foot because that means Bernie Sanders wouldn't be able to run either, but that's fine. Like, we would have still had the only candidate that ever brought up pardoning whistleblowers still on that stage within this age group, which is Tulsi Gabbard, and even she fucking endorsed Joe Biden, and that one doesn't make any sense to me because Biden is diametrically opposite to everything that Tulsi Gabbard stood for. And as a Gabbard supporter, I was pretty flabbergasted. And when she did that Jimmy Dore interview, I felt like Jimmy asked her some very good questions, but she turned into a standard politician and kind of ran around some of the answers, which was doubly disappointing, I thought. But she's the only person that's brought up pardoning Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, and then you wonder why people don't want to blow whistles, or you have a bunch of people that trash these whistleblowers for saying, well, why don't they come out in public? Well, it's because look at how we treat them when they do. Is one of them has to live in Russia, the other one's is dying in front of our eyes in prison, and then the third one we kept in prison, letting her amount an astronomical amount of debt. Like, this is how we treat people that tell the truth. So it's like, why would you want to be exposed for it?
The thing that really brightened my day about seeing Chelsea not only get free, but she raised about $300,000, and within 36 to 48 hours paid off all of her fines and met her fundraising goal to be able to live for this first year that she's out of prison. She raised about $40,000 personal dollars outside of her prison fines. So to see it happen that rapidly, that it can be like, okay, she's free, and then the internet come together and say, okay, well, let's pay off these fines so they can't hold her or charge her because she hasn't paid them in a reasonable amount of time. And then on top of that, provide her with a substantial amount of money to get her back on her feet, so to speak, while she tries to get her speaking career and all of that back up and running. So I was damn proud to see that happened.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't what they did to Chelsea Manning completely illegal? Like, they were trying to coerce her by putting these fines and keeping her in prison. Like, that's illegal, right? Like,
as a matter of fact, it is not, Krish. In fact,
really?
The law states that Judge Tringa, the judge in her case, as long as he felt like more time and more fines would break her, according to the law, he had to keep her incarcerated. If at any point it was demonstrated to him beyond his own reasonable doubt that more time and more fines would not break her, he had no choice but to release her. So the punitive fines, the isolation, the extended prison time, that's all codified into the U.S. legal system.
Jesus.
Straight up. Yeah.
And then you have that's why I find it astounding. Like, once I hear this sort of information, I'm like, how can anybody fucking support the United States criminal justice system when this is legal, is coercing somebody just because you think that they might break, which there was no chance in hell that she was, because she kept saying that, and you had thousands and thousands of dollars in fines that, and she was still like, yeah, I'm not going to give you information that you want because the information you want is false. It's a lie. And
Right.
She stayed true with her word. It's just huge. That's amazing.
Well, she already testified, of course, back in 2013. And what she had said back in 2013 was that she leaked this information to WikiLeaks at her own volition because of her own moral principles. And what they wanted her to say essentially was the fact that she was coerced into doing so, specifically because she came across this list, which is referred to as the 2009 most wanted leaks that was on the WikiLeaks website. That's what they were trying to get her to do. So then she would have been contradicting what she had said in the past. So I think, and this happened shortly after the first part of the hearing wrapped up. So I think absolutely it was the reason why she was freed and why this grand jury investigation was dropped was because the United States was realizing, okay, you know what, we really do not have a strong case here. Of course, this extradition hearing is going to continue on, but I think that they realized that there's no way that they could get her testimony, and that was because of what the defense had presented in court a few weeks earlier.
And to kind of bridge this to something else, this signature here, because we were talking about it earlier, this is Reverend Annie Chambers. She was the sister of a lieutenant of Malcolm X in the Black Panther movement. We had, I would call it the privilege, I guess, the darkest of possible privileges, to be a group of people that got to hold a protest outside of Chelsea Manning's prison and demand her freedom. And that's where we met Reverend Annie Chambers. And we had a bunch of different groups from Baltimore come up with us, like the People's Power Assembly. We had a couple anti-ICE groups join us. All thanks to a wonderful gentleman named Ian Schlackman, who really took the call to action that we put out to help us ally with other groups to heart. And one of the things that we did there was we got whistles. Like, we had a bunch of soccer coach whistles, basically. And the way the prison's set up, at least from the back, you have the prison complex here, and then there's a entry ramp to an overpass that runs directly next to it. It's probably about 1,000 feet away from the actual wall of the prison. And there was 30 of us under there blowing these whistles as hard as we possibly could for a good, 3 to 5 minutes, to the point that, whoever didn't have their ears plugged had ringing for a few hours just because of the volume of noise that we made. So one of the things that I hope is that we at least heard her, or that she heard all of the whistleblowers in the parking lot that were trying to raise awareness about what she was facing. So I don't like the fact that we had to go out there and do it, but the fact that we were there 2 weeks before she was released is something that's just really personally impactful, that just shows differences can be made, even if it's just a small group of dedicated people, because there were people that were there long before us holding protests too, so I don't want to take anything away from them, because we were just a small piece of this entire thing that was going on. But I'm just so happy that she's free at this point. We actually, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a video I'm kind of obsessed with for this day and age right now. We love playing her 2018 campaign video, just because she doesn't call for political change. She calls for a revolution in the way that people view government. And I just think that message is so powerful, and I can't wait until she starts being able to put her voice out there into the world again, because of how important it is, especially in a time like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very excited to see her running. By the way, that was when I saw that happening, I was like, "Fuck yeah!" I think we might actually we have some real revolutionaries, running for office. That's what we need. We need more of, and we have that there. We have these people that I think were inspired by people like Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, and that they want to carry that truth forward, and they want to have real social justice for the American people. You have people like Shama Savant in Seattle, who's on the city council. She's a city council member in Seattle, and she defeated the Bezos candidate, essentially. You have the same thing in Lansing. There's a guy by the name of Brandon Betts who defeated this corporate Democrat that was spending 3 or 4 times the amount of money that he was in his campaign, and all he did was go door to door, and his whole idea was, we need to start this sort of social revolution and have a different idea of how we look at government and what the role of government in a citizen's life is supposed to be. So, you have these people that were doing that, and that's what I really liked about Chelsea's campaign, and the message that she was putting out there is let's look at government differently. Let's not have it be this system where a bunch of people go, in a back room somewhere with closed doors and smoking cigars in this fucking eyes wide shut party, and then sit there and be like, we'll give you $1,200, but you got to promise to give it back. That bullshit is just not going to work anymore. And I think it takes, people like Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, and Edward Snowden, who also could have said that I'll come back to the United States, but none of them would have been or have been given a fair trial. So why would they willingly turn themselves over to a system that does not value them, that does not value what they do? But again, I think this is a glaring example of how this government system is not listening to what the people want. Taylor was reporting the amount of support that Julian got in the first 2 days of the hearing, which was amazing, because you don't get to hear those kind of stories in corporate media, because the way corporate media likes to frame these people is that they're terrible, awful people, and you wouldn't want to have a beer with Julian Assange. Well, I'd beg to differ. It's the other way around. I don't know if Julian Assange would have time.
So
Eleanor Goldfield actually has the.
Yeah, when I was there, there was quite a bit. Yeah, when I was there, I mean, there was an overwhelming amount of support to the point where the British police, who were actually a lot nicer than I thought they would be, American cops would have been much more aggressive with the people, but there wasn't any major confrontations, but people were so passionate. They were sitting down on this sort of pathway to get into the courthouse parking lot to prevent this truck from getting into the parking lot and other vehicles from getting there. And yeah, there was so much support. And in fact, you're right about the corporate media, of course, Krish, because CNN, I saw them there on the first day. They were there in the morning and they left halfway through the day. So they only were there while the prosecution was presenting its opening arguments, and were not there for when the defense was presenting its opening arguments, which is really interesting. But beyond that, I didn't see any other corporate media there at all. And of course, the support is something that they're absolutely not going to be reporting on. And we know that if they did, it would be twisted to make it seem as if the protesters were bad people or not listening or being disobedient. So it was really important to get that footage out there.
Yeah, and that's
back to the having a beer.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, just real quick, because we had Eleanor on probably like 4 or 5 months ago, and she actually wrote a piece in regards to the comment of, I wouldn't want to have a beer with Julian. Like, I fucking would. But it was basically her thing is, it shouldn't matter if you want to have a beer with this person, because the contribution that he made to human society and giving us access to information and crimes of our government at our behest that takes our money every single week, essentially, it's irrelevant to having a beer. Like, it doesn't matter if you want to sit down and have a drink with this person. The simple fact that he is sacrificing his entire existence for over a decade now so we can have factual information goes so far above wanting or not wanting to have a beer that even putting it in a perspective like that is just sheer propaganda. Like, not against you, but that was like the argument that she was making about it. And she actually had a beautiful piece of written word about it that I thought was really, really powerful.
Yeah, I love Eleanor. She's actually a good friend of mine. So I agree. I 100% agree. I never understood why that's the fucking metric of why you would support somebody or not, is whether you would be able to sit down and have a pint with them. And it's also what a closed-minded way of looking at things, right? Like, you disagree with what Julian Assange says or does, so now you won't have a casual drink with him to try to talk about it. Man, if that was the case, like, I would not have beers ever. Like, I would be drinking alone, like, lonely at a bar all the time, right? Like, I have friends that I disagree with, and that's kind of the best place to do it, is you're a little bit looser and you get to talk about it. So I bet you would get a lot more honest of a response from someone like Julie, from somebody that you disagree with, if you had him over a beer. But that's by far, like, not a metric that you should measure the amount of information that Julian Assange has revealed and put out there for the people. It's ridiculous that oh, I can't have a beer, so everything that he's done is invalidated. Okay, maybe you shouldn't be making decisions for the world if that's how you see it.
I think another thing too is his character, and whether or not you like him as a person is completely irrelevant to supporting him and supporting what he does. And also too, there aren't like many publishers out there or journalists who we measure our support for them based off of if we like them personally. I believe it was Julian Assange's mom who tweeted out several months ago, very few people have even met him. Very few people have even met him to even make this point about whether they like him as a person or not. It's completely irrelevant. And like I was saying, she tweeted this out and made the great point to say that we just do not talk about publishers and journalists and whistleblowers like this, really. Now, that is not to say that many of these individuals are targeted and smeared and their character is destroyed. That's for certain. But as that being a measure as to whether you want to support somebody, it's just really strange. And then also, too, I'm not of the belief that we should be telling people like, okay, just because you don't like his character means that you could still support him, because generally people don't support people that they dislike. But again, this goes back to the point that many people have not met this person. So I think just looking at his actions and what he has done is really, really important. But it seems to be a common theme that we see with people who have been the targets of these smear campaigns. And I believe that there was a video that we wanted to show. I'm not sure if we are going to really touch on that. Andrew and Steve, I know, Steve, you would have to pull that up, but I think it may be a little bit long. But I'll direct it over to you, Steve and Andrew, if we want to move on to news of the evening, or if we want to play that video.
No, we said we weren't going to do it. It was too long.
So I know that we are anticipating perhaps maybe another guest joining us at 10 p.m., but we are not too sure about that. But of course, right now is a critical time because the extradition hearing at this point, it is still going to take place on May 18th. Of course, that is subject to change, and that was also mentioned during the court hearing that took place earlier today. But Krish, I do want you to have the opportunity to just explain through your perspective why you support Julian Assange and kind of what you make of what took place last month in the courtroom. I'm not sure if you paid too close attention to it, and it was, several weeks ago. But if you could just explain for the audience and the viewers why you support Julian Assange and whistleblowers.
Because he revealed the truth. That's what whistleblowers always do, is they kind of show you who the government is lining up with. He revealed war crimes, corporate fraud from everywhere around the world, not just America, which is another misnomer that a lot of people have. Is he revealed British, Russia? It's just we just keep talking about the American ones because America is the only country that wants to extradite him. Under a 108-year-old law that has no standing in today's world, that was in argument 108 years ago anyway. It's just one of those things that it doesn't make any sense to me why you wouldn't support somebody that reveals that your country and your government has been lying to you and has been stealing from you. And that's what Julian Assange did. That's what Edward Snowden did. And that's what Chelsea Manning did, is they were basically revealed all this stuff. So regardless of what happens, and I hope that everything goes well for Julian, because I don't want to see him put back into prison. That's for nothing, really. He didn't really commit a crime, period. But even if something does happen, what he has revealed can never be put back into the box, right? Like he opened our eyes to the truth of what Vault 7 was all about, how the CIA is spying on us through all of our technology, the Bibles of Scientology, and the most famous one that he revealed was about the American soldiers killing civilians and stuff. Like all of this stuff can't be unseen. No matter what you want to do, no matter how much you want to try to rewrite history, they just can't, because all of this stuff is out in the open and too many people know about it. So really what Julian Assange has done is set the truth free, and they're trying to imprison him for it, which is bullshit. And the way they handled that trial, if you want to call it that, they reveal that, and feel free to correct me if I get some of the details of this wrong, but that they were actually like they used some kind of like cybersecurity agency against him, so he really didn't have any privacy, period. So all of the private conversations that he had with his lawyers were being looked into as well. I can't remember the name of the company.
Yeah. The organization was called UC Global.
That's it.
And there was emails that came out in court because it was a Spanish private security firm that the people working there literally said like, haha, we're going to the dark side now and shit like that. They installed microphones and cameras in the women's bathroom, in the meeting room, in his room, like in his like dorm essentially, because he had like a little kitchen, a living room, and then a bathroom, and just watched everything. Like they would have meetings in the women's bathroom thinking that like there might be some politeness behind these monsters, but there wasn't. And I don't know where that court trial stands, but it has been able to at least let people see like this is what the funder, Sheldon Adelson, it was his private security company that was doing this. And we had an interview with Cassandra Fairbanks a while back, right after she revealed the information about Rick Grinnell's deal with, or not Rick Grinnell's deal, but about Rick Grinnell going after Julian and basically it came down to, she went there to tell Julian, hey, they found out, like I found out this information. They're not going after you for Vault 7 or any of this. They're going after you for Chelsea Manning's leaks. And then that's kind of from just the way she described everything, how he became aware, because they detained her in the embassy. And she said that they locked her in a room for a period of time when she was there. So it's something that, like, the fact that they could just get away with doing this for so long, we need more Chelsea Mannings and Julian Assanges and Jeremy Hammonds, because without them, we're literally just lost in the dark. Like, what would WikiLeaks tell us right now about the coronavirus, about its origins, about the actual death rates, about all of these things that we don't truly have statistics or numbers or evidence of, but there's just this mass speculation across the board.
And to go off of the UC Global and their spying on Julian Assange, we also learned on Monday, February 24th, the first day of the court hearings, that the UC Global was going to work with U.S. intelligence and create a situation during the night which would allow for U.S. intelligence to enter the embassy and poison or kidnap Assange. That was actually discussed by members who were a part of UC Global, and that was revealed in court on Monday. It didn't really get too much traction, but the fact that they were willing to kill this person is really disturbing, and it was something I felt and many others felt deserved much more attention.
Yeah, and these are the good guys, right? Like this is what corporate media is like. Yeah, these are the good guys, and Julian Assange is the bad guy. The people that are doing supervillain shit, where they're like, how do we get in and poison his tea? Or those are the people that you got to support. is poison the tea people, and then Julian Assange, which is like, hey, I just revealed that these guys want to poison my tea and like a bunch of other people's tea, and they're like, that guy's, he's trouble with this guy. It's like we're living in an upside down world when we're supposed to sit there and say that people who reveal the crimes of the elites are the real criminals, and the elites who continue to commit these crimes, they are the people that you have to support. They are the people that you have to bail out constantly, and it's ridiculous. How are you supposed to? I find it frustrating at times when I meet people and they kind of recite these like corporate media taglines to Julian Assange, and call him a bad guy. Well, he's done this stuff and that stuff, and it's just okay. Personal feelings aside, what he revealed seems to be pretty important. Like how would we feel? If we hadn't known about the Gulf of Tonkin and what really happened there, what would the shape of history be? And that's really what whistleblowers do, is they give you an accurate perspective of history, so that history is no longer just written by the winners. It's written by people from both sides. It's written by a neutral party. And really, to me, that's what Julian Assange is. Julian Assange, Mike Pompeo likes to call him what is it, a non-state hostile entity or some crazy shit like
Hostile
that.
non-state intelligence agency. I
That's
actually
right.
want to get a
Yeah.
shirt made that says friendly neighborhood non-state intelligence actor. just as a way to parody that, because of how ridiculous the very sentiment of this is a journalistic institution. Like, just because it exists on the internet doesn't mean that it's a terrorist organization.
Yeah, again, it's the narratives that they like to throw out there and tell people what to believe. And again, and again, Mike Pompeo is is pitched as the good guy. This is the guy whose side we're supposed to be on, when he's literally taking somebody that's on a neutral side and making up a phrase and a term to villainize this person. That's what psychopaths do. You're like, Mike Pompeo is gaslighting people, and we need to break up with Mike Pompeo on like every level.
While you're here, and speaking of Mike Pompeo, I'm gonna pull something up here real quick. I don't know if you saw this or not, but just a couple of days ago, I woke up and I got onto Twitter, and one of the very first things that I saw was Stefania Maruzzi, I think is how you pronounce her. I'm probably mangling her last name. I'm terrible about that. But Mike Pompeo was over in Italy. And in the process of that, he was in the process of him delivering the speech. A reporter came up and like got up into his comfortable space, and she hands him a bag of dog food, but it's in a brown paper bag. She hands him this bag, and she tells him, "This is a bag of dog food, and I recommend that you eat it 3 times a day, so that eventually you will have I think it's the loyalty and basically the humanity of a dog." I don't know if you saw that or not. I'm rapidly scrolling through my Twitter feed right now trying to find it.
That's fucking hilarious.
It warmed my heart, to be perfectly honest. Like, seeing that come out, because I don't think it's even a brown bag. I think it's a legit bag of dog food. And she just hands it to him and like looks all happy and shit. And then he's like fucking confusedly like horrified. And then she gets rushed off stage by like 80 private security people. So it was absolutely wonderful.
I mean, I'm assuming Pompeo didn't take it well, because I think there was a question about Ukraine that was asked to Pompeo at one point, and he like flipped out on an NPR reporter. And again, it's like, these people are showing you who they are. Like, Mike Pompeo just revealed to you that he is a psychopath that's just going to scream at a reporter because she didn't ask the approved list of questions or whatever. And it's astounding to me that whenever people come out and they're like, well, the CIA knows what it's doing. Yeah, when it wants to take over countries we have no business being in, they know exactly what they're doing. They have a standard operating procedure.
So here's what it was. It was a welcoming ceremony, and she tells him to eat the dog food 3 times a day so that he'll develop the honesty and credibility of an animal that eats its own turds. You can't hear it, but there she is, just getting yanked right out of there. Like, nope, sorry, you don't get to liken Mike Pompeo to a creature that thinks cat shit is almond roca. Sorry about that, lady. You're done. I had that. Not all heroes wear capes. Like that woman's just awesome. I want to find out who she is and probably kick in for her fucking for her upcoming legal fees. I have a feeling that she went to one of those windowless rooms for a number of hours while they went through her devices, and she had a lot of questions to answer. Mike Pompeo, by the way, horrible human being. If anyone deserves to be delivered a bag of dog food on stage in that manner so that they might have the credibility and honesty of a dog, it's that guy. It is giving Fat Mike from NoFX a bad name because Randy Credico refers to Mike Pompeo as Fat Mike, and as a someone who grew up in the punk world and had to hear a lot of NoFX over the years, I feel like Fat Mike from NoFX deserves a little bit more credit. I really do. I just had to play it. I think it's the funniest goddamn thing.
So, yeah, Mike Pompeo, long history of admitting to lying, cheating, and stealing. But moving on, of course, there was a hearing that took place today in London at Woolwich Crown Court, I believe, and this was for Julian Assange and for his potential bail. His attorneys did file an application for him to receive bail so he could leave the prison, of course, because of COVID-19. We know that COVID-19, this virus, is going to really impact the prison populations quite heavily, and being the fact that Julian Assange has a chronic lung condition and other health issues puts him at an increased risk for contracting the virus and actually having fatal consequences if he does contract the virus. Unfortunately, Judge Vanessa Baratzer chose to decline this bail application, and she cited the fact that Assange has a history of absconding and that he will likely do it again and not attend his extradition hearing, which is to resume May 18th. Earlier today, Steve Poikonen on his own channel, Slow News Day Show, make sure you do subscribe to his channel as well. He spoke with friend of the vigil who was present in the courtroom or in the courthouse when this bail hearing took place. That was Mohammed El-Mazi. Steve is going to show us a clip from his show. Mohammed will be able to explain in a greater depth what took place and what this really means for Assange. So, Steve, if you don't mind pulling that up.
It's a longer clip, so we'll probably stop it a couple of places and discuss it a little bit, because I really, oh, God damn it, there it is. Really don't want this thing to go the full 17 minutes.
There are 3 sets of speakers.
And I can't get it any louder than that.
You're showing the wrong screen.
Oh. Okay, hang on.
Everybody else was there via.
Give me a sec. I'm not the. Too many.
So
tabs.
we are pulling up
tabs. There we go.
journalist Mohammed El-Mazi discussion with Steve from earlier today, and here it is.
Journalists were there by a telephone conference, and that includes the prosecution, Sharon Lopen, speaking on behalf of the U.S. government. So it's important to understand that the U.S. government is the other party being represented in court, not, say, the British government or the Crown Prosecution Service. And the U.S. government was there opposing his release. They spoke first. Their main arguments were, and I just quote correctly, it's not for any court to preempt any decision which the Ministry of Justice may make in this respect. So she said, according to the Bail Act 1976, the arrangement of protection for those in prison is up to the Ministry of Justice, not a judge. She also noted that it's been widely reported that the government may start releasing people on temporary license after risk assessments have been done. So she's saying this is up for the Ministry of Justice to do, and really it's not for you to preempt what the Ministry of Justice will do. She also told the court argued that the health of an individual won't be relevant to the risk of a defendant absconding while on bail. And that's a quote. She said, to continue, we say that on behalf of the United States, there are substantial grounds for believing that Mr. Assange, if on bail, would abscond, would commit other offenses, or would otherwise obstruct the course of justice. He's already indicated that he's willing to go to almost any lengths to avoid being extradited to the United States, we say that the risk of flight is insurmountable, she argued. So you get the idea of her main arguments. This is the lawyer representing the United States government. She spoke first via a telephone link, as I said. She also then quite specifically dealt with the fact that, hey, look, there was another extradition case towards Sweden, and there was surety, guarantees that were made, and people who spoke on his behalf, and arguments that were said that, he wouldn't want to reduce the image and the reputation of WikiLeaks, not only himself in front of his supporters, that he's a man of honor, that £100,000 was put up, etc., as collateral, and then in the end he absconded, right? And then he absconded to the embassy. This is what she argued. Okay. And this is quite important because the judge ended up referring quite strongly as well to this case. So this, by the way, I think people wonder why it is that the lawyers never made previous bail applications. You have to understand the thinking and mentality of judges here, possibly in other countries as well, possibly in the United States. If you have somebody whose conviction, to be fair, is only conviction in any case, but nonetheless, who's convicted of absconding while on bail, also in terms of an extradition case, where it was argued that the reason he did this was because he feared extradition to the United States, you can understand why they didn't. They wanted perhaps to wait until they had a strong enough legal footing to be able to present a bail application, because you don't want to just make an application that will be rejected and not really have good grounds to appeal, because you can run out, if you like. You can have too many bites of the apple. So you have to be strategic with applications. And that was the main argument of the other side. So what I already said, along with the fact that, look, he was on bail before and he violated the bail, so you can't trust him, right? If anything, he said this is about extradition to the United States. Well, the reason he violated bail before is because he said he feared extradition to the United States.
So I'm going to stop it right there for a minute, and we can kind of discuss the first couple of minutes. Let me kick it over to. Let's start with you, Chris, and we'll go around to the rest of the crew here.
Did he, was there defense that he absconded to the Ecuadorian embassy? Like,
yeah,
he ran away. What?
Yeah.
That is an insane. Like, he didn't run away. He just doesn't want to get extradited to a country where they'll put him in maximum security prison for doing nothing. So, and it's not like he's going to get a fair trial when he comes to the United States either. So, of course, he's going to go and find a place where he can feel safe and do the work that he needs to do. That's a ridiculous claim to make. So they're denying him bail during a global pandemic because he went to the Ecuadorian embassy and looked for asylum. That's the craziest fucking excuse I've ever heard for not giving somebody their human rights, which is what this would be. It would just be granting Julian Assange basic human rights during a global fucking pandemic. Like, that's the craziest thing I've heard.
And it seems like they specifically use the terminology to get around the word asylum. Because not only did he get asylum, he got citizenship status to the nation of Ecuador, which takes it a step further. But if the court had to recognize that, then they would also have to recognize that it was illegally removed for him to even be put into the court to begin with. So that's something that I don't know how the full proceedings went that first week, but they've literally just danced around it completely. The fact that they illegally violated the Ecuadorian laws, at the stroke of a pen removed his asylum and his citizenship status, and then skirted him off to this prison to face this show trial to begin with.
Right, and I think it's also worth noting that several public bodies and advocacy groups have called upon for low-risk prisoners like Julian Assange to be released from prison because of the increased risk for contracting COVID-19, specifically the Prison Officers Association and the Prison Advisory Service have all called for this. And the judge completely ignored that, completely ignored the real threat that is present, and that is that Assange's health is not great right now, putting him at a greater risk for contracting this illness. And also, too, it was his attorneys who offered for him to be put on house arrest during this bail period. So he couldn't abscond, which is what she was claiming that he would do if he were to be released. So they even offered for that, which is a pretty decent compromise, I would say, yet still this judge failed to really act appropriately once again.
No, I don't have volume. Okay, there we go. So let me go back to this thing, because we did touch on some of that throughout the course of this discussion. That's the one that I want. There we go.
So that's their argument, right? Then Fitzgerald comes along. He says, "Look, this was historic. The factors that were in play 8 years ago aren't in play now. His father will be based here. In fact, his father comes back and forth in Australia. Spends like half his time here. Also, his partner with children will be based here. In fact, his partner's identity was not revealed. There was a push for her name to be made anonymous, to be anonymized. The judge didn't agree, but she did agree that there would be a reporting restriction, at least until 7th of April, and it'll be up to the press to argue why the anonymity should be pulled. Press did try to argue today that it was pulled, not me, but one of my colleagues. The Press Association did try to argue that it's in the interests of the public to know what his partner's name is, but there's also concern about the children being harassed, etc., because of the media frenzy. So, but that's a side issue. So she submitted her own witness statement saying, "Look, there's me, his children. We're going to be based in this house. It's not close to London. So it's not like there's an embassy that he'll be close to that he'll run by. There'll be all kinds of conditions, ankle bracelets, etc., that can be done." Fitzgerald also argued that, look, we have, people who are alleged to be violent terrorists who are kept in custody outside of prison, right? So there are means and measures whereby if we can do this with people who are suspected of being incredibly violent, dangerous terrorists, then we can do it with somebody who's not accused of any kind of violent offense, right? And then there's also the health aspect. He presented 3.
Before we get into that, let's kind of go around over there. And Chris, I don't know how much time you have with this, so if it was gonna wrap, or did it wrap? Is Chris already gone and I'm just an asshole? No, there he is. Okay. Okay. I don't know how much time you have left with this, so if before we go and dissect the next 7.5 minutes of this video, if you gotta run, please let us know, and we'll be happy to close you out, and you can throw some final thoughts and where people can find you at us.
Yeah, I should be able to stick around till the end of the video and give you my thoughts. Do you want me to give you my thoughts on the last little segment?
Oh, please, yeah. Please.
I think he's right. Is with the level of it's so weird how much visceral hatred there is towards this man, and like Taylor pointed out, towards somebody that not a lot of people have really met, and they're kind of making a lot of their judgments based on what the media says, what interviews he might have done, and the way that he kind of presents himself, which sure, there's an there you could maybe say arrogance, but it's just somebody that's good at their job. If you've met anybody that's good at their job, then yeah, they're going to come off a little bit arrogant or cocky or confident about what they're doing, but that's because they're. Do you know how many fucking comedians I've met that I can say are arrogant because they think that they're good at their job and aren't? So, but that's it's a valid point. Is you have his parents come, his dad's flying back and forth from Australia. You have his partner who they can't reveal their identity because of just this negative drawback that it's going to get, and you have kids that are involved. And they're still not granting this person just a little bit of reprieve during a global crisis, it just kind of shows the amount of vitriol that the justice system, not just in the UK but also the US justice system, has, because I'm sure they're pulling strings along here as well. Is that is so much vitriol to have towards somebody, to not let them go see their kids and go see their partner, or just hang out with their dad, you know, and especially when their dad's making these transatlantic flights to come see their son. It's cruel. It's and really, America should be against it because we have the Eighth Amendment, and this is cruel and unusual. I think this fits into the category of both things. It's just I'm astounded that they haven't granted him bail on these things. Like, it's just it's mind blowing to me.
Yeah, I think that there's, of course, a lot of pressure coming from the U.S., and there would perhaps be some repercussions that would be felt by the U.K. government on behalf of the U.S. for kind of providing him with that bail, or granting him the bail, and then also to even preventing this extradition, which is quite frightening. But I think that there would be some reasons that, other than the fact that they want this person to be held accountable, if you will. The U.S. would have probably some very harsh punishments for the U.K. government. And then also, too, the judge had said that she has no reason to believe that Belmarsh Prison is not going to adhere to like their health guidelines, and that he is not at an increased risk in the prison. Yet 100 staffers at Belmarsh are sick with COVID-19, and many of them are self-isolating, which has then prevented his legal team from meeting with him, and then also prevented his family from meeting with him, or for him having visitation. So it seems that she has been citing this like very unrealistic faith in the system that they're going to actually protect prisoners when they're not. And somebody in our chat actually made the great point to say, if they can't protect the royal family from COVID-19, how can they protect prisoners in Julian Assange?
Sorry, I think that's the whole point, though, is to not. I mean, we've got a hands-off genocide potentially brewing, not just in Belmarsh, where there's 100 people now who work at Belmarsh who have been tested positive for COVID. We found that out today or last night. But in American jails, Jeff Black, who's been on the Vigil a couple of times now, was on my show a week and a half ago or something like that, because he had just come out with a petition for the state that he lives in, Oregon, to their governor, Kate Brown, to release inmates from jails who are there on nonviolent charges or who are there awaiting bail. Julian Assange, nonviolent prisoner, being treated worse than suspected terrorist, worse than someone that they yanked up out of like the London. Was he bombing people or stabbing people? I can't remember. Maybe a little column A, a little column B. That guy gets better treatment than Julian Assange. It is disgusting.
It's because of
you look like you want to talk, Andrew.
Yeah, I was muted. It's because at the end of the day, that guy that hurt a bunch of people didn't hurt anyone that had a bunch of money and power. That guy that hurt a bunch of people did, in their minds, less damage than revealing the crimes of empire. And so, I mean, that really shows what they view as dangerous. And it's not the guy that runs down the street hurting people. It's the guy that shows how governments abuse their power and commit genocides around the world in the name of freedom and democracy.
It kind of really shows you where these people's mindsets are too, is because the way that they're treating Julian Assange is in an attempt to try to discourage other people from being whistleblowers, trying to prevent other people from talking about these subjects, like corporate fraud and war crimes and all this other, and it's really the elite saying, look, if you come after us, this is what we'll do to you. We will make you stay in a prison during a global pandemic. That's what we're going to do to you. And it really shows you that these elites, the people that are in power, the people that have all this money, they just don't give a shit. That's really well it shows, is that it just shows how callous they really are, and how much they really don't like when you challenge their authority. And these are all the people that'll sit there and say that they're champions of Western civilization, they're champions of democracy, and they act like authoritarians, because that's what they're doing to Julian Assange, because this is not a fair way to treat someone, especially even if there was a reason to put him on trial. You wouldn't do that. You would grant him bail and get him the fuck out of there, which is the reasonable thing to do, which is the humane thing to do in this situation. So really, their attitude is, don't be a whistleblower, don't be someone like Julian Assange, because we're gonna treat you like this. Is sort of the way that they're going about it.
And I think we just had David jump in with us. How are you today, Mr. McBride?
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry I'm so late.
Yeah. Oh,
David, thank you so much for coming on. I do want to give our viewers just a background on you. And for everybody that's watching, David McBride is a whistleblower who is facing potentially 50 years in prison for blowing the whistle on the Australian Defence Force for their highly politicized leadership. David, thank you so much for joining us. And I would like to give you the opportunity to describe your background, your position with the Australian Defence Force, and also if you could take us back to that moment where you decided to blow the whistle on this government entity.
Okay, great. I went to law school out of school, and then I went to Oxford University in England, and I then decided I didn't want to be a lawyer just yet, so I joined the British Army, and I was a normal army officer, which I enjoyed, and I've kind of been an army officer all my life. Eventually, when I got older, I went back and became an attorney in Australia, mainly doing criminal law. And then I ended up in a kind of a full circle, an attorney for the Army, the Australian Army. And I did a couple of tours of Afghanistan with the Australian Army as a uniformed lawyer. That is, I was there to make sure that we followed rules of engagement and we didn't kill civilians and such things, and we knew what we were doing. It takes a while to become a whistleblower, and it's interesting what you said. I came from a family of people that always tried to do the right thing, and I was very much in the establishment, and I think that's one of the things that makes my case quite powerful. I was never an anti-establishment person. I believed in the rule of law. I believed in democracy, Western democracy. I had no problems. When I first joined the army, the Soviet Union was still up. We were manning the sort of Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall, and I was very proud of all that. And I think that's what makes my case unique, in that, and I had very good reports, in that I had a very good career, and I think it's almost a progression from Julian Assange, who was obviously a clever guy but an outsider, and used his skills to get information from insiders. But then you've got Edward Snowden, who, while he was a contractor and had been a soldier, again was sort of a couple of steps removed. But in my case, I was very much within the hierarchy. I had the highest possible security clearance. I wore a uniform. I had a good career. And it took me a while to realize it, but I could see that what we were doing was not what we were saying what we were doing. And we were increasingly using the war on terror purely to win domestic elections. And, we would, in broad brush, we would drop bombs on anywhere we wanted to, in order to win a midterm election, because it looked sexy to have the right, the jets, dropping bombs, and it looked tough. In fact, the whole reason we were in Afghanistan really was because it looked good. And no one really cared about whether we were going to win or not. In fact, it takes a while for it to dawn on you when you try to correct what we're doing and say, look, this is not working. You understand this is not working. And you realize people don't care whether things are working or not. It's all about appearances. They want it to look like they're being tough, but they couldn't care less whether we won the war or whether we improved the situation. It was really all about sound bites, 7:30 TV slots. As far as they were concerned, appearances were winning the war. And obviously, I could see that was illegal. One of the hard things about being was it wasn't easy to get anybody to agree with me. And if I went to the mainstream press and tried to explain this, people that were like, oh, that's all a bit complex. What's the difference between reality and appearances? And is it such a big deal? And it wasn't easy. I thought I'd get a pat on the back and a promotion when I first tried to make my reports. First, I just made internal reports, and wrote them and thought that someone would say, yeah, look, you're right. We got a bit carried away in the heat of the moment. It's a war, and we can see that we have strayed from what we're meant to stand for as Western democracies. But no one ever said that. In fact, they just turned on me. And it became quite hard to get the message out. In fact, that's my plan A was to have a kind of a Watergate thing where I'd get some very good investigative journalists who would ask the hard questions of the administrations and prove that we were just doing things for show. That wasn't so easy. And in some ways, that situation in America in the 70s was a fantastic example of the best case scenario. But today the politicians have got so many more media consultants and stuff, it's harder to do that. My plan B was what I've done, and that is to get charged with a criminal offence. Because while it's a bit of a high-risk strategy, it's the only way. Being a defendant in a criminal trial is about the only way you can get the issues to be looked at out of the spin doctors and out of being steamrolled by the government propaganda. As I said, it's a bit of a high-risk strategy, but I'm glad that at least the issues are going to be looked at. That's it.
Look, can I ask you then, because I know that here in the States, if you're a whistleblower and you get charged and you go to court, you go to what they call espionage court in the Eastern District of Virginia, and it is a closed hearing. There's the jury isn't even given a copy of the proper transcript. They've taken out words and replaced them with nonsense words. There's no press. There's no gallery. And the only information that gets out about what happened in court gets out through the judge who happens to leak whatever he or she wants to leak. Does the Australian system, is it similar, or is this something that when you go to court, there's actually going to be a gallery there and people are going to be able to sit, transcribe, and then immediately go and report?
That's a very good question. Luckily, we haven't gone completely down the American route yet. Yeah, and I've heard about the courts that you have, and it is pretty hard to believe, but it's getting that way. We've learned a lot of bad lessons from the sort of American administrations, and they've passed laws now where they can close the court and they can do things like that. It was possible, for example, that I wouldn't even be allowed to hear the evidence against me. And the people that do that, the people that make those rules, again, in reflection of your system, are not the prosecutor. The people who are actually prosecuting me for breaking the law. They've been very even-handed and very good, but the government is allowed to join the court case as a separate party and try to close the court. They have tried to close the court. Luckily, our judges are pretty good, and they haven't been completely politicised yet. I don't mind so much if the court is closed. But as long as we haven't gone down your complete lack of legal protections that you have in your intelligence courts, and which is lucky, but it's still there's still a possibility of being railroaded. But yes, it's not as bad as what you've got. But I think the only way to face these courts is you have to kind of go in front of them and show how ridiculous they are. To a certain extent, it may involve being imprisoned, but eventually the system will fall because people can see that it's BS. It's not part of our legal tradition.
David, before we continue on talking about your case, our first guest of the evening does have to head out, and I want to thank you, Krish, for coming on. Once again, it's always great to have you joining us. So before you do sign off, please leave us your final thoughts, and then also let our viewers know where they can find you on social media and how they can find your work as well. And if you could just point everybody to those resources. And again, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's always a good time to talk to you guys, and thank you for all the stuff that you guys are doing, because honestly, the craziness of everything, and trying to find information about what was going on with Julian Assange's trial, I actually was able to find a lot more information from you, Taylor, than virtually anywhere else. I think Chris Hedges had some reporting that he did as well. So I thank you for what you guys do. I think we need to support independent journalists and independent artists right now more than anything. And we have to stand behind our whistleblowers. We have to stand behind people that are courageous enough to come out and reveal the truth about the crimes of empire, as Andrew put it. And we have to stand together in solidarity. So I know David, we cross paths very, very shortly, but good luck to you, and I hope everything turns out well for you. And I'll definitely be fighting for that. And where to find my stuff, the easiest place is on my website, which is ramennoodlescomedy.com. That's RAMAN noodlescomedy.com. All my videos and stand-up albums and tour dates, whenever those are going to come back, are all there. So yeah, thank you guys for having me on the show again, and would love to come back and talk more about punching the empire in the dick. That's what we're going to do.
Love it.
All right, Krish, thank you again.
Good, David, could you talk a little bit about the information that you had revealed that put you in this position?
I'd have to be careful about that. We might all get arrested. Funnily enough, it's not truly national security. Well, not funnily enough, and it's a bit. It's almost a bit. To make an analogy, a bit like the Pentagon Papers, in the sense that it's not about any kind of secret weapons that we use, but it is about the fact that we continually lied to the public, that we knew we weren't winning. We knew we would never win. We didn't care whether we'd ever win. We told the public we were going to win. We sacrificed soldiers' lives in order to get a blip in the opinion poll. We've got very, very cynical in our political manoeuvrings. We're completely ruled by short-term opinion polls, and if we have to kill a few people in order to get a bit of a blip in the opinion poll, we'll do it. And this is one of the conflicts I've had with the government, because they're saying, oh, this is all national security stuff. And I've been countering, saying it's not national security if it's a crime committed by the government. And they've actually, it's pretty outrageous, and it's good to speak to an audience like you guys because you will get it. But they've actually changed the definition of national security. It's almost laughable to include things that might embarrass key political people. And you're not even allowed to say things which is going to, make their opinion polls go down. But the key elements of what I was saying is that you could see from the backroom deals and what we were doing. We didn't really care about soldiers' lives. We didn't really care about Afghan lives. We cared about opinion polls. And if the situation was mirrored in Syria as well, even more so. We seemed to learn all the worst lessons and then apply them. And everything we were done, it was kind of like a game of mirrors. Everything we were, rather than us trying to put a positive spin on the things we did, we just kind of made up stuff if it suited us. And when we tried to put out a public statement, the first question that was asked was not what is true and how do we put a positive spin on it. The first question that anybody used to structure a public statement was what will sound good. And the truth, the law, when that was no longer interesting. So I guess what I really showed was the government lied. The government didn't care about the lives of their people, and everything was done purely for opinion polls.
So we've had John Kiriakou on the Vigils before, and I have a show separate from this called Slow News Day, and John has been a guest a couple of times. He's the man who disclosed the CIA torture program in 2007, and for his efforts was handed 2.5 years in federal prison. He said that when he was going into the court, into Eastern District of Virginia, and this is going to kind of like dovetail with what you were just talking about. His lawyer at the time, when he was telling her, look, I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to have my day in court. I'm going to be able to air this out, and we're finally going to get to the truth of the matter. She stops him and she says, you dumb son of a bitch. This isn't about what's right or wrong. This is about mitigating damage. And that sounds it sounds incredibly similar, not only to the way that Australia has decided to say what is and isn't under the rubric of national security, but at least the way that national security type events or things that are related to the national security state are presented in the media. Am I on track there?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big control of the media, and I've been lucky that I've had a bit of a perfect storm, and we've got about 3 cases going on, and the government made a fatal mistake where they searched the house of a Murdoch newspaper journalist. And so that was the first time that the same time that they searched the sort of TV stations doing my case. And so there was a public outcry, or there was a press outcry. But apart from that, you could. Well, we've had one famous case. It's famous now. This is this will send chills down your spine. It was even worse than your friend was talking about. The guy, he was like one of our spies, a CIA equivalent. And he said he had mental health issues, and he said something down on was relatively minor breach of protocol, sending something on the internet which he should have sent on a secure line. And they had a trial for him in Australia, a secret trial, and they didn't even use his name, his proper name, on the court lists. And they put him in jail under a secret name. And nobody who knew him even knew he was in jail. And it wasn't until he got out that anybody even knew. And that was a lot of judges in Australia were quite chilled by that, because no one even knew that was possible, to put someone in jail without anybody knowing and changing their name and giving them a changed name in prison. And he hadn't blown up, the parliament. He'd done something relatively minor, and they didn't like him. So
That is insane.
yeah, no, it's quite good.
That is fascinating. Hey, how long before people knew he was in jail under an assumed name, or did that ever come out?
It wasn't until he had a relatively short sentence, 15 months or something. Yeah, it wasn't until he got out and he wrote to a journalist, and they were like, "What? Are you kidding?" And the story became public. But they kept on threatening him, to saying, if you ever let anyone know, we're going to put you in jail for longer. And the poor guy didn't really have any support systems. And even now, he's not allowed to mention the name of his employer. It's a pretty shocking case, because that's the one we know about. How many do we not know about?
That's a fair point.
We have something similar in place here that came under what's called the National Defense Authorization Act, where the United States government can literally take anyone at any time for the suspicion of terrorism and remove their citizenship and jail them indefinitely without a trial, without any kind of hearings or anything. So the U.S. is something that probably built that model and then had some law get passed over in Australia that allowed them to get around any type of due process or legal process for this person.
Yeah, no, that's right. And all these things were passed after 9/11. And I guess the legislators were kind of thinking, wow, if you had someone like, a really serious ISIS terrorist who was hell-bent on blowing up buildings, and he had a team around him, we may need to have such draconian laws to thwart a terrorist plot. But the problem is, there's no adult supervision, as I call it, for who they use these laws on. And in my case, for example, it's clearly I'm someone who's fighting corruption, and they're able to use the full strength of those laws for some sort of psychopath who's part of the team against me, and no one's there to say, really, he's just a sort of anti-corruption agitator. He's hardly, an ISIS operative. But there isn't any distinction, and the politicians get to decide who gets treated like a national security threat, and no one else. And they will use it for political purposes. In fact, that's one of my key points. We increasingly use the security arms of state purely in a cynical, selfish political motives. And you can draw on the Watergate analogy to say, if they did that today in Australia, they'd get away with it. You would be allowed to go to the opposition's political offices and burglarise them or do whatever you want, because no one there'd be no one in the security service who would say, no, that's not right, because there isn't any kind of moral compass there in there.
It's actually that very idea is one of the things that happened in the 2016 election that no one really talks about, where elements of the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA literally, for lack of a better word, forged warrants to be able to wiretap people within Donald Trump's campaign. And that's it. If you search the term Spygate on any social media, it comes up a little bit, but for the most part, the abuses of the intelligence agencies from 2016, not even just wiretapping a room, but wiretapping an entire political apparatus took place. And it's something that it's just, no matter what political spectrum you're on, short of like Tucker Carlson on Fox News or the guy from Judicial Watch, it's not even really brought up.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I know about that case. And this was in 2016. I was at my lowest ebb, you know. I couldn't get anybody to care about my case. I was pretty much suicidal. And I heard about that Spygate, and I was really buoyed by it. In this, well, I was appalled by what I heard, but also the fact that people pushed back. And I thought, thank God, some people understand that, you know, there's a difference between fishing for evidence in your political enemies and having probable cause. And we need to, that distinction really matters, because while it's all very well to say, oh, well, what is, you know, bugging doesn't sound so bad. The security services don't play nice. And once you're declared an enemy, they can do all sorts of things apart from bug you. They can, you know, harass you, they can honey trap you, they can actually kill you. And we need someone to make sure, someone, as I said, adult supervision, who is really a security threat and who is just a political enemy where you're fishing for dirt. It's a very important distinction. It's hard to make sexy for the general public. As you said, no one really, only people who are into this stuff even knows too much about that case. I do, because it really helped me. But yeah, it's a very important distinction, and we've lost that. In Australia, people even who work in the area don't seem to realise that there is a distinction between harassing the government's opponents and actually working in the national interest.
So for everybody watching right now, I want to let you all know that David McBride, our guest right now, does have a GoFundMe. I linked it in our chat. Do help him out and donate to the GoFundMe if you can. If you cannot, please share the link on social media. I'm sure one of my co-hosts or Josh will put the link back in the chat for you guys. I want to read something, just a few sentences off of your GoFundMe, David, because I think it really speaks to your character and it's very powerful, and I want people to hear this. You say here, and I'm going to have to find it now, but it was basically about your willingness to put your own life at risk for the greater good and for a greater cause. And that's something that's really admirable that many people are fearful to do. And that's why we don't have more whistleblowers. A common theme with our vigils is that we call upon people who are in the intelligence communities and who are in these governmental organizations who are witnessing this power, misuse of power, and this corruption to really blow the whistle on these entities. And I think this is a pretty our audience will probably understand this, and of course us co-hosts do, but why do you think it is for people who are a little bit more skeptical or not familiar with this world and all that it entails, why aren't more people becoming whistleblowers and stepping up and really trying to initiate some change?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and there's a lot of psychology involved in whistleblowing. And on various different levels. And firstly, once you become a whistleblower, the people who don't join you, there's a certain amount of collective guilt with them, and they kind of think, well, I didn't blow the whistle, therefore I'm gonna have to justify the fact that I didn't. So you get a lot of enemies who feel obliged to speak against you, because by you being a whistleblower, it kind of makes them feel a bit bad. You do also get a lot of people who are actually quite scared. I was probably quite naive, some people would say, or idealistic. I always thought I'd have a chance at being successful. As I said, I kind of thought I would be more successful earlier on, in that people would kind of appreciate what I was doing. And that was a surprise. My father was a whistleblower himself in that he was involved with this drug thalidomide, which you didn't get in America, luckily for you, but it was in the UK and Germany and Australia. And if women took it during pregnancy and the winds were aligned, etc., their children could be born with terrible deformities. And it was the 60s, and he said, I think this, and it was just like an aspirin, a morning sickness drug. And he drew the analogy to say, I think this drug is actually causing deformities. And of course, that had never happened before. They'd never had a case where a drug that was didn't harm the mother in any way would actually harm the fetus. And he blew the whistle on that, and he was successful. So I guess I had something, a little bit of genealogy, in that I thought that I've also got a fair bit of Irish ancestry, so I'm a little bit nuts. And I kind of, the more they pushed me, the more I wanted to push back. And when they said, "Oh, we're going to put you in jail," I was good to be able to say, "Yeah, do it." And it brought out the kind of fighting in me to say, and that was a great liberating thing when I was able to say, I'm not afraid of jail. I used to be a soldier. I used to obviously have to, risk my life, put me in jail and see it. And that kind of throws them because they don't expect anybody to say that. Although saying that, it has been a hard road. I can't honestly say to people, become a whistleblower, life is great. It's pretty hard. It's worth it. I've never liked myself more. And even though I noticed that once when everything was falling down about my head, I was laying on the bed and I thought, for the first time in my life, I really liked myself. Even though all the kind of trappings of success were being taken away from me. But people are quite scared. I think not everybody, and possibly with good reason. People sometimes contact me and say something like, "You've got more followers than you realise, but we're too afraid to even contact you because we feel that from then on we're going to become a target." And so I think people are probably rightfully scared. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to do with my case. I've got 2 children. I don't particularly want to go to jail. I'd prefer to be on the speaking circuit. But if I have to go to jail in order to make the world a better place, it won't be so bad. And all I would hope is that people will come after me and people will come after them. And then we can really improve things. So it's not easy being a whistleblower. You have to be prepared to be rubbished. But saying that, it's something that is really worthwhile.
I think that's
good. We were in Washington, D.C. During the first week of Julian Assange's extradition hearing. And we were holding protests and events and rallies throughout the city. And one of the things that we did was we went out in front of major media outlets and we held a demonstration in front of them. And at the building that housed The Hill and Politico and a couple other outlets, we were approached by one of the employees there saying basically echoing what you just said. We do support, as people that do support Julian, I support Julian, but if I go on record to say this, I can lose my job. And DC is one of the more expensive areas on the planet to live. If this particular gentleman had his entire life tied into, paycheck to paycheck from The Hill, he was risking that just by showing some support, David, not even by stepping forward and saying, this is how the media, frames a situation improperly, illegally, inaccurately, whatever, just by showing simple support. Is there an independent-ish press in Australia that has picked up your story and is running with it, or is it basically the establishment legacy media that decides whether or not they're going to give you any airtime or column inches on any particular day?
Yeah, it's pretty much that. Luckily, I had a good run because there was a few other whistleblowers happening at the same time, and the press got behind a what they called a right to know campaign. But if you're unlucky, you could die without a trace, you know. So I have been pretty lucky, but there's no guarantee at all that you're going to get a free run. Now, Julian is a good example of that. He struggles in the mainstream media, and nobody ever says, "Look at the things he uncovered." You know, they're a whole lot worse than anything he's done. You know, you never hear that in the mainstream media. And even I struggle with that, and that's the luxury I've got, is that hopefully I'm going to get a fair hearing, and I can shine a light on the things that I uncovered rather than let the focus be about me.
I think so. Oh, I see Andrew talking. You're muted, Andrew.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment on what he was saying, but I feel that you have a question. So why don't you go ahead? I just saw that you were muted.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask, what was the final straw, essentially? Like, what was the thing that just made you go, I can't keep this secret from the world anymore? Because everyone who has blown the whistle has some just thing that clicked in them that they just say, like, I can't keep this inside. So I was just wondering if there was a point for you that really became like the turning point in making this decision, even before necessarily revealing the information.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And there was an exact point. I can remember it, and I can tell you exactly where I was standing in a reinforced sort of concrete bunker in Afghanistan, and outside a senior officer's door. And I remember the moment, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And it's quite, I've got a book contract at the moment, which is good, with Penguin Random House. And so I'm going over all this at the moment. And it's quite interesting because it did kind of happen, as you said. There was a moment when I suddenly said, this is not over. And up till that point, I was still towing the line. I was still, I was still sort of always trying to see the organisation's point of view. It's a bit like when you've got a partner, like in the movies. Sometimes you've got Hollywood movies and someone who's got a partner who turns out to be a serial killer, and they trust them and it's not till the very end when they realise that something is totally, there's some concrete evidence, and they realise that all the times they were giving them the benefit of the doubt were wrong. And I did have that moment. It's kind of hard to explain to you what it was, but it was something that became clear to me, that the only explanation for what this decision that had come from the headquarters in Australia, the only explanation that there could be for sacrificing the life of this soldier was because it looked good to the sort of press gallery. And I did, just like you said, I snapped then, and even though my boss said, leave it, we're never going to win this battle, I remember when he said those words, I remember thinking, it's not over. I'm going to take this further. And it was like a year before I made, because I had to keep working and whatever before I made a very detailed internal complaint. And it was a full 2 years before I actually leaked documents to the press. But that moment in Afghanistan in 2013, yeah, I knew it wasn't over, and I knew that I was going to become a whistleblower, and it was going to be a fight to the death, I guess. That's it for me.
Yeah, so I just want to say that perspective and attitude is something that I wish more people within our armed services would adopt, because as much pain and as much strife has been caused, it's not inherently the people on the ground's fault that they decided to fight in these bigger conflicts, because they were sold these ideas of patriotism and these are our enemies, and we have to do this to protect our country and our way of life and our livelihoods and our freedoms. But something just I find interesting about Australia, and I don't know how inherently true it is, but when they broke British power about 100+ years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they actually instituted a First Amendment like we have in the United States, as illusionary as it is at this point, where journalists don't inherently have press freedom. Is that
that's
true?
right. They have. There is no First Amendment here, and funnily enough, our Constitution is copied from your Constitution, but we don't have the amendments. Our equivalent of the Supreme Court has implied a freedom of political communication in some extreme cases, but it takes a lot of rigmarole to get in front of them. And yeah, we certainly can't. There's a beauty to the simplicity of your system and the clearness of those amendments, flawed as they obviously are, as you said, but at least, yeah, we don't even have that. And it's not possible in my case to plead that. It's not available. So that's why I have to go down the sort of route to say, if the government is inherently wrong, breaking the law, not applying democratic principles, it is the duty of every public servant to rebel, because the government is no longer really the government. They're criminals. That was kind of clear to me, and that was a bit the sort of thing I was thinking when I decided to become a whistleblower, to say, the government have become the enemy of the country, and I'm going to, even if it's just a one-man army, I'm going to have to rebel. That's something that not everybody believes, of course, and you're right to say it's not the fault of the soldiers on the ground, or they do a terrific job. It's really the fault of the people higher up, and of course most of them are more interested in getting promoted than they are in doing the right thing. But that's the failure, and people have got to be able to say that's wrong. That what that government decision is wrong. Whether it's not being able to sit down on the bus or whatever, you've got to eventually say that that's wrong and not make excuses for the government. And you're right, it'd be nice if people did that more often, but people once, and it's, I think a lot of it boils down to, once you compromise on small things, it gets harder and harder to actually take a stand. So we need to get a little bit more of ethics education, where people can make that distinction that something is either right or wrong, and if it's wrong, you've got to do something about it.
Now, Australia is unique as far as Five Eyes countries go, in that they have you have a member of parliament who is himself a whistleblower. Has Andrew Wilkie reached out to you at all? Have you guys communicated? Is he interested in hearing your story, or is he not listening to anything that has to do with the war in Afghanistan at the moment?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and there's lots of twists in my story. His story is quite similar to mine. He was a whistleblower against the Iraq War and against the weapons of mass destruction and the fact the government was misleading the nation. Funnily enough, he doesn't want to help me. And he gave me a kind of political answer to say, oh, I'd like to help you, but you're not from my part of the country, despite the similarities we have. I think he still knows a lot of people in the military. His ex-wife is kind of a senior person in the military, and a lot of his friends are still in the military. And the way it's turned out, he hasn't helped me. That doesn't mean he's a bad person or whatever, but it's interesting the way that real life is not always what you'd imagine it. He say that he has helped Julian Assange, and he has been quite vocal. So he's done some good things. It's hard to know what goes on in people's heads, but like doesn't necessarily help like.
So speaking of Julian Assange, what is your perspective on a fellow Aussie being Julian Assange, who is being held by the UK government, facing a potential extradition to the United States? And what has the sentiment been like in Australia?
I'm pleased to say it's getting better. There's a lot of sympathy for him now. And the protests have been very good. And I think if you sat down with a normal Aussie and explained the situation, I think that they would pretty much unanimously say that it's wrong. There are difficulties because of the extradition and the inability to perhaps look at the sort of the real issues in an extradition hearing. Despite the fact that mainstream media do not give him a good run, the pressure for the average Aussie is growing. And I think if worst case scenario, he was extradited and he was put in an American prison, there would be a big outcry. I think people would say, what is going on here? And this guy is not a terrorist. He is not a bad guy. And I think that while that would be hard for Julian, momentum would build to a boiling point and he would be released pretty quickly because as we know, it's all a bit of a show trial. Your administration wants to put him in jail to kind of, to have some sort of a victory, but we also have very close ties with the Americans, and I think he'd be let out the back door pretty fast because we had another case with a guy called David Hicks, which was, and he was actually a member of the Taliban, and he fought with the Taliban, whatever, and he was in Guantanamo Bay. You probably know all about it, but for quite a while awaiting trial. He eventually was sentenced, but his sentence was very light. It was like 6 months or something like that. Admittedly, he'd been in trial he'd been waiting trial for a while. And then he was released quietly back to Australia. And I think that there's an element of what happens with the show trials is that they don't really want Australians in jail for a long time because the average Australian would not be very happy about that when they know the facts of the case. That Julian Assange was just really shining a light on what was going on. It'll be hard for Julian, but in some ways it's good for the cause because the worse he is treated, the more people will be outraged, I think.
Do you think there's any hope or chance of repatriation soon? That the Australian government, because there is that working group of MPs that are trying to get Julian brought home, do you think that would be ever put forward, that the Australian government would demand that he be released to Australia?
No, unfortunately not. Because we are so in the US's pocket now as a government. It's embarrassing. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I suspect the extradition thing will fail. And as an insider, I've got to be careful what I say in case, the Secret Services come and get me. But there's almost the UK, Australia and the US and probably Canada as well. It's almost one administration now. And for Australia to, because he's been charged with national security offences or whatever, they just could not. It's a shame, and it's something that I'm embarrassed to say, but we no longer have a backbone. And the idea that our government could stand up to your government, they don't. When we went to Afghanistan, all the Americans had to do was ask. They don't even have to ask. Any time the US troops go anywhere, we will go with them, even if it's just often as it is just for show. All we're doing is sitting in a room somewhere while you guys are doing all the hard work. We're linked like Simon's twin.
Wait, George.
Sorry.
George W. Bush called it the coalition of the willing. And it was what? It was Australia, Canada, the UK, and then like 2 island nations that didn't even have a standing army.
Right. It's all for show. It's all for show.
It's just it's mind-boggling. And there is a uniformity. There's also. Go ahead, T.
Oh, no, I was just, somebody in the group chat, Rob Juno, asked, this is a question for you, David. He wants to know, what can non-Aussies do to help your cases? Well, Rob, we did talk earlier about a GoFundMe. We'll put that again back in the chat. But, David, how can people who are not Australian citizens help you out and bring more awareness to your situation and to your case?
That's great. It's good to hear. The GoFundMe really helps, but if you could just contribute a bit on the GoFundMe and send it to some friends. Social media has been good. It's just circulating my case it'd be great. I'd be so grateful because it's been very lonely. This whole it is quite tough at times, and actually things have got a lot better. And I'm so grateful for your broadcast. It's a dream come true for me, who's been fighting in the wilderness for a long time, and I'm so grateful to you guys. And I'm embarrassed I didn't get on earlier. I didn't really realise quite how good it was going to be. And just spread the word. I'm still small enough that I'm available to reply to people. I love Americans. I love America. And I'd be so grateful for any kind of contact. It actually really helps me for people just to say hello. But, a few dollars on the GoFundMe and send it to a friend would be fantastic.
So I recently saw a video that was circulating across Twitter, and I don't know if I can find it at this moment, but it was of an Australian military member that drops in out of a helicopter with a dog team and is running through a field, and one of his squad mates basically gets a man to the ground, an unarmed man who's begging for his life. And I believe that this was in Iraq or Afghanistan, and basically executes him, like while he's laying there on the ground. And there is some, I believe, criminal proceedings coming against this guy. But it reminded me a lot of watching the Collateral Murder video when I was probably about the age of, I want to say about 18 or 19 when that came out. And a lot of times people blame the individuals that commit the crime without looking at the larger rules of engagement that had been built behind it that allowed them to think an action like that was okay. Because I don't ever think we're going to see a day where we can just dissolve the U.S. military. I would hope to see all of the world dissolve their militaries at some point. but do you think that there would be a way to not even necessarily hold the ground troops responsible for these crimes, but to hold the people above them that created the rules of engagement and gave them the training and the thought that acting like that would be okay?
Absolutely. And that's what my case is about. And that's why the government are scared of my case, because while I know the video you're talking about, and it is very confronting, it was very confronting for me to even watch it. But that things like that will always happen in a war. When you put 50,000 troops on the ground, you do, regrettable as they are, murders as they are bad, but we need to look, and Julian Assange did the same thing, we far more need to look at the leaders and the commanders than blame this guy on the ground. I mean, it's not about the corporal or the private soldier on the ground. It is about the general, and it is about the politician that does that cynical things, and you know, as I said, we'll bomb a village just because it looks good on the 7:30 news. That's more of a problem, and also the fact that that's all covered up by his media support team. That's the real enemy, is the institutionalized politicization. And as Julian Assange has pointed that out, some of the email, you know, one of my favorite or least favorite, but it sums it all up, were the emails from Hillary Clinton, which WikiLeaks exposed, where she was saying, we're going to arm Islamic, hardline Islamic terrorists, a bit like Al-Qaeda, in Syria, and get them to, you know, destabilize the Assad regime, and that will help Israel. And it's kind of like written on the back of an envelope, and no one stopped to think to say, look, we went down this road before in Afghanistan with Osama bin Laden, and it didn't go very well. But that's the sort of stuff which is the real enemy, you know, not the soldier on the ground. That's what my case is about, to say high-level stuff. It's interesting about that case, the video that you saw about the soldier shooting the Afghan, that the person who released that video, the whistleblower, in that case, the government won't prosecute him because they don't mind whether a soldier gets put on trial for murder, because it doesn't affect them. But they want to prosecute me for the same offence, releasing information, because senior people are being blamed by my revelations, and they really don't like that.
Oh, without a doubt. David, I want to thank you so much for coming on this vigil. Our chat, everybody that's watching right now on YouTube, has so many kind words for you. Everybody is saying awesome guest, awesome discussion. They really, really support you, and people are thanking you for all that you have done and your courage. Right here, great info, great spirit. And so I just want you to know that you have so much support from our viewers. You are welcome back on at any time. I know that we all have really, really enjoyed this discussion, and we really, really admire your courage and the fact that you are willing to put your own comfortable life that you once had at risk for the greater good. So everybody, please do, if you can, donate to David's GoFundMe. Do follow him on Twitter. Tell your friends about this case. Circulate that link on social media. David, before you do sign off here, if you could leave us with a final message, and then also if you could let everybody know once again how they can help you, and then where they can get in touch with you and your social media, so people can follow you and be able to keep tabs on what's going on with your case. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, my final message is, of course, thank you so much. I mean, you've really made my week. There are times when I get quite down, and I really wasn't expecting this today. And I can't tell you how much, you know, I feel like $1 million now. I feel like I could go to jail, and whatever. The good message I really want to say to you, and this should make everybody happy, is that I really think we can win this. And I stumbled upon something by accident, but by going to trial and making a big deal of these issues and getting, I obviously need supporters like you guys, but getting the issues out there, I really think we can finally make a dent in what's wrong in the world. And that's quite exciting because I'm sure all of you get quite frustrated when we don't seem to be making much progress. And I noticed even when Julian Assange's revelations came out, I remember speaking to an intelligent Belgian woman and she was like, the real tragedy is nothing's changed. And I think that's a frustration we all feel, but I do honestly think that we can make a dent. Together we can actually make progress. And I'm so grateful spreading the message about I'm happy to go to jail if we make a difference, as my mother called it. And I can't wait to come to America and see you all, if that's where you are, or around the world. I guess that's my greatest aim, is to do speaking tours and things like, and not in an ego way, but just so we can continue to make a real difference, because it's great that so many of you are out there. And I guess my last point is you do make a contribution by supporting. Not everybody can be a whistleblower. We only need a couple of good ones to make a difference, but you guys are part of the team. And by smiling, saying hello, contributing, spreading the message, you are just as much a soldier against injustice as the whistleblower, because the whistleblower cannot do it without you. So thank you guys so much for caring.
Absolutely.
David, I want to let you know we have the support of our tech. I think he did just sign off, but oh no, he's still with us. David, I want to let you know that you have the support of our tech guy, Josh Benton. He just told us in a chat that he wanted to make sure that we let you know that our tech supports you. So again, everybody, we were just joined by David McBride. Do follow him on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @MurdochKittle, and we'll put that in the chat for everybody that's watching right now. Do give him a follow, say hello, support his GoFundMe by circulating that link and by donating. It's a great cause, and we look forward to having him back on with us. But for right now, we do have some additional news that we need to get on. We did discuss earlier the hearing that took place today, and we learned that Julian unfortunately will not be receiving bail. The judge did deny that request. But we do have some more news that we want to talk about. And just briefly here, before we get into the phone call that took place a few days ago between Julian Assange and Yanis Varoufakis, we just want to make note that one of Assange's attorneys was actually put into the hospital. This is Baltazar Garzon. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but he was hospitalized with the coronavirus. And he was admitted in Spain on Tuesday. He had a fever at his home, but we just wanted to bring some awareness to that. Guys, do you have any thoughts on this before we get into this phone call?
No, I mean, good on him for being financially secure enough to get tested, I guess. I don't know how Spain is doing there. I know they nationalized their hospitals recently. I'm not entirely sure if that includes testing services. I know here in California, at least, we just in the last day or so started having access as regular human beings to COVID tests. Of course, we wish Baltazar the best and a speedy recovery. There's on that Don't Extradite Assange WikiLeaks lockdown playlist that we talked about either last week or the week before. One of the documentaries on that playlist centers entirely around Baltazar Garzon. And it's really, really, really interesting. It's one of the ones that I watched right off the bat because I knew the least about the story. Yeah, brilliant, fascinating, incredibly brave human being, and we wish him the best.
So some other news that we have, there was a phone call that took place between Yanis Varoufakis, a Greek economist who I actually was able to see him speak in London. He gave a fantastic speech. He is also I think one of the co-founders of DiEM25, or very heavily involved in that organization. Julian Assange did call Yanis Varoufakis. They had a 10-minute long phone call, which he outlines on his website exactly what they spoke about. And in particular, Yanis says that Assange wanted to talk about COVID-19. And again, this phone call took place prior to today's hearing. So for some thoughts on this, I know there was some controversy surrounding this that we may want to briefly touch on. But guys, what are your thoughts on this phone call? When I looked at this article here, it really reminded me that we knew Julian Assange's voice, and I'm just so interested to hear his perspectives on how our governments are reacting to this COVID-19 crisis. And we were able to see a little bit of how he perceived this whole situation.
If we could actually explore that article first, like that he had written up about the conversation, because it gives a really good, just like backstory about what they had talked about. Because they had gone into a lot of detail about multiple different things that they had discussed, and COVID was one of the big factors in it. But it actually points out, and I'm sure we'll get to it here about halfway through, how Julian Assange doesn't even know what's going on inherently with the COVID epidemic or pandemic, or however we want to word it, because he doesn't have access to even watch like the basic cable news shows that are going on right now over in the UK. He can't get visitors because of lockdown, because of the coronavirus. So they're even more so, even in the middle of this pandemic, putting Julian in an information-based glass box at this point, where he's not able to even get the propaganda that's going around in regards to this. So does someone want to pick up from the top and read here, and then we can kind of go into it?
Yeah, sure. Let me scroll back up so I can actually see. I'll pick up about halfway through where we jump into the conversation. Julian wanted to talk about the effects of COVID-19 on the world we live in, and of course on his case. He remarked that Corbyn's election manifesto, that the establishment had lambasted for being too radical, now seems unreasonable moderate. We laughed at the audacity of those who were telling the people of Britain that it was irresponsible to spend a few tens of billions on providing proper funding to NHS and social care for all, on turning broadband into a public utility, and on taking the railways into public ownership to make them work properly. The very same people who, now that big business and capitalism more generally are in serious trouble, seem to have discovered the money tree, announcing trillions to be pumped into the economy. Julian did not know, how could he, when prison authorities deny him access to newspapers, the internet, and even BBC Radio 4, that Boris Johnson had earlier yesterday announced the temporary nationalization of the railways, seeing that privateers can never provide a decent service in the midst of a national emergency. Let's skip that here for a second. Julian had a hopeful comment on this. At least transnational organizations like WikiLeaks and DiEM25 had honed the digital tools for online debates and campaigns well before COVID-19 came on the scene. In some measure, we are better prepared than others. I'm going to come back to the panel here for a second, because we kind of talked about this in our own right when we're discussing the COVID thing. We're well prepared to be able to kind of weather this storm. Well, it doesn't matter if you're a gamer and you've spent, you know, a good chunk of your adult life hanging out in relative isolation, just communicating with people online and killing monsters, or if like me, who spent a lot of time in an off-grid house, not always around electricity, not always around even running water, that kind of thing. We're fairly well suited to be able to weather this storm. I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the article. Taylor, what do you think? Put you on the spot.
Okay, I'm not laughing at what Steve was talking about. I'm laughing at something else. Okay, here's the article. I kind of did not listen too closely to what Steve was just saying. Andrew, why don't you weigh in? I know that you did step out for a second. Why don't you pick it back up where Steve was left off, as far as with this discussion about COVID-19?
I'll just pick back up reading. Then we talked about his case. His prison conditions are deteriorating. Now that visits have stopped, his isolation is getting worse. His lawyers are about to petition the court for bail. If any prisoner's health in Belmarsh High Security Prison is in jeopardy of COVID-19 infections, it's Julian's. Will the court grant him bail? Unlikely. Will the new crisis change the odds of his extradition? We agreed that the answer to the last question is probably, but only a little. Now that the national security complex in the US and the UK have things to worry about that did not feature a few weeks ago. Our conversation lasted about 10 minutes and 1 second. Then the prison warden cut the line. The one man who knows the perils and pains of isolation better than any of all of us have emerged from it to give us a 10-minute lesson on how to not lose it while in confinement. Make no mistake, dear reader, Julian Assange is...
Sorry.
No,
I can
you're
go
fine.
back.
No, the last part's kind of just puffery. Not that it's bad puffery, but the thing that I wanna drive home with that final part is the idea that we are all Julian Assange is literally coming to fruition. This man has been in isolation in one form or another for a decade now. And as his court trial, as his extradition date, 55 days away, is pending, we see that they have the power to put everyone in isolation. In the United Kingdom, right now, in this moment, you cannot gather 2 or more people not from the same house. And this is following a few weeks ago a gathering of 10,000 people in the streets in London in support of Julian Assange. So the mere fact that the slogan that everyone has said, that we are Julian, is now more real than anything else has ever been in this situation, because this virus has basically allowed them to put not just the United Kingdom and not just the United States, but the world into isolation at this point. And it takes brave people to share true information, so that way those people that are currently imprisoned in their own houses, in their own countries, can at least have access to the truth about what's going on. But so we have a couple more things here that we're going to be going over. And I'm actually going to get back here to the video. And I hope I can share with sound. If not, I'll have to have Steve re-screen share this about Julian's extradition hearing. Or not extradition, his bail hearing that took place today. So let me get this pulled up here on the screen real quick. And then I have to make sure that the sound's coming through for it. No, I don't think I have sound on my end, so I'm going to have Steve hop in to do that here real quick.
On which bit?
Just picking back up in the Mohammed Almazy video.
Okay.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, no, it's right. It's right where it was. Let me.
Your
let me
camera's
get-
off, buddy.
Okay, let me get the share screen going here. Do. God damn it. So Jitsy's a new format for us, and we're still working on getting to know it a little bit better. Here we go. And once again, the whole interview is available on my channel, Slum News Day. Mo and I talked about not just what happened and what he witnessed in court today, but got into a decent conversation about UK law as a whole.
Witness statements from doctors, three reports from doctors, two of which have multiple have examined student Assange on multiple occasions. They said while technically Assange doesn't fall into the category of vulnerable groups as currently defined by the government, which is defined comes from NHS, comes from Public Health England, the Public Health Department. They said first of all that is being adapted over time in terms of who falls into the vulnerable category, and also he's had 4 separate respiratory tract infections just while in the embassy. He's had infections with his tooth that wasn't dealt with. He has early onset osteoporosis. He has depression, which also means weakened immune system. All this time of isolation. So they said that they do believe nonetheless that he is in a vulnerable state. There's a very high likelihood of him getting infected because he's a prisoner, like all other prisoners. And that seems to be the generally accepted position, by the way. That including from the president of Prison Governors Association, they said it's almost guaranteed that prisoners can start dying because of the level of concentration of prisoners as well as the unhygienic, overcrowded conditions that they're in. They also said that he, like everyone else, is at high risk of infection, but he's also they consider to be in a vulnerable category. So that was a key part of the argument. There was also the legal preparation argument. They said we don't think, quite frankly, that the hearing is going to be able to go ahead on the 18th of May. But if it is, and even if it's not, he needs to prepare. And we're already having difficulties preparing under normal conditions. I already mentioned the fact that the lawyers aren't getting proper access. He's not getting proper access to his case file, right, etc. That's been going on for months. But also, we can't visit our client now. And there's video link option, but there's a queue for that. And right now, the queue, we won't be able to speak to him until next week. Like, there's a queue because there's other prisoners who want to access video link, right? Yeah. It's not like there's 50.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but they've got to know that that's not a secure video link. There's no lawyer-client confidentiality over that video link.
Well, that wasn't mentioned. I would imagine that if that was said to the judge, they probably argue that it is this kind of video link is. The government can be trusted not to listen in to, which would be ironic, of course, given the fact the government would know for a fact was spying on him or crime conversations while they're in the embassy, but that's a separate issue. But so an interesting point actually. I discussed this with the lawyer after the hearing was over. She never addressed that particular point, by the way, in her judgment. But just to finish off those arguments before I come to her judgment, which was. So we can't properly prepare for the case.
Oh my God.
How can we do this when it's like, when there's a massive queue and it's going to be done by a video link, right? So that means, we have even less access to our client than we normally did, which was insufficient before. He's at high risk of infection. He's now looking at 23 hours or more of isolation, which exacerbates his mental state, depression, right? We already had a statement, a report from 3 separate medical professionals saying that Assange was shown to be psychological torture. Part of that is extreme isolation. The contributing factor. We're looking at now 23 hours or more of isolation now because of the lockdown, with only 40 minutes, with only a brief 30 minutes exercise in a small yard with 40 other prisoners, right? Which, given COVID-19 is all about transmitting high risk of transmission when you're in close contact. On the one hand, he suffers like other people, perhaps from extreme isolation, but now more isolation because of lockdown, which exacerbates his mental health. On the other hand, what little access he's got when he's not in his cell will be with 40 other people in a very small area, right? So it's like, and also queuing up. He said queuing up for the video link. You can see there's all kind of chances of getting contaminated. So it's like, and it's not just to be clear, it's not just good lawyering, say, from the defense side. Like I said, there have been multiple reports I've read that have been published in the last week or two, which made very clear that prisons are massive incubators for contagious illnesses. Iran, for example, has released over 70,000 prisoners. 70,000. You can't imagine that Iran would be doing that for no reason, right? They're doing it because
that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
At least a week and a half ago. I read the number is 85,000. It could be lower. But the point that I made was, according to the West, Iran is this brutal theocratic regime that has no value for the lives of their own citizens, but they can release tens of thousands of prisoners. And Julian Assange still languishes about them.
Yeah, exactly. And so the point is that it is recognized that prisons, that's why the social distancing rules are in effect. Because the 2 meters, the more than 2 people in a group, it is precisely on that basis to reduce, as much as possible, reduce the spread of the illness while all kinds of measures can be taken in terms of beefing up the healthcare system, as well as working towards a vaccine. So these are the main arguments posed, right? That you can take more severe conditions to ensure that he doesn't abscond. You know, the kinds of things that you would do, think about the kinds of things you do for somebody accused of serious terrorism offenses, but who isn't in prison. Because that is done, house arrest, all kinds of house arrest. There's the health, there's the legal preparation, also 12 guarantors. So they found guarantors and all the rest of it. So then the judge comes to their decision. Her decision was to refuse the application.
Before we get into this, because it's common knowledge at this point that she did deny bail. Where are you at right now, Andrew, with what you, because I don't know if you got to hear Mo talk about this earlier today. Like I'm not entirely
No,
sure.
I didn't actually. When you guys were, I'm impressed at the audacity of the court itself, that even amidst this like global health crisis, for lack of a better term, and lack of knowledge on what's actually going on, that the judge can basically continue to spit in the face of a man that revealed the agencies that the judge's husband works for. Like, in the simple fact that doesn't get her removed as a judge, even though that was brought up. But the larger point that you guys talked about, and the way that he can now communicate with his lawyers through a video link, that's crazy to me. The fact that the only way he has to contact his legal team now is through what can only be assumed as a non-secure video link. So not only did they destroy his attorney-client privilege in the Ecuadorian embassy, they also did it in Belmarsh prison, after not even allowing him to sit next to his judge in court, and at the end of the day, taking away all of the papers that were given to him about the proceedings that were going on. So this is just a continuation of that same brutal process as punishment, where he's treated worse than like almost any other prisoner in the history of the world at this point, at least in Western civilization terms.
All right. Well, we got 4 minutes left of this, so I'm going to go ahead and try and play it, because this is where just about everything that you were saying comes in to be fully evident in terms of how the denial of bail was delivered. So let me get back over to the thing. And there you are.
He didn't address any of the parts in terms of violation of his right to due process or his access to lawyers. He didn't mention that in the statement. I should also mention right now that her statement was made pretty much immediately, so it was prepared. So obviously she'll have had some of the arguments in advance, right? It's not like she wouldn't have heard any of the arguments. Some of it would have been sent to her in advance to prepare, because that is normal here. Even though you have an oral hearing, legal submissions are made previously. But the point is, the arguments were made, and then as soon as the arguments were done, and it was clear that everyone had finished, she finished his summation, she took a breath and then started to read from a prepared statement. So she had already, it's clear to me that she'd already made a decision on the papers. I suppose arguably she might say, well, I could have been convinced otherwise orally and changed my mind, right? So I made the decision on the papers on the basis that, I've made my decision, but I'll let people come up to their own decision about that. She outlined the brief history of the case, noting that he previously absconded from bail. She considered that to be quite significant. That was key to her decision. She, in terms of the healthcare aspect, she said, well, she noticed that the 3 doctors disagreed with aspects of the government's guidelines. Yeah, but she said, the government is being guided by scientific advice, data-driven advice from Public Health England, and I'm sure with all these people who are working, 1,000+ people in Public Health England, working on a science-based approach, or providing the best possible rational advice for the government, and the government will base its decision on what to do with prisoners based on what they're being told. And I have no reason to consider that they will do anything other than what is in the best interest of the prisoners, right? So that was a key part of what she said.
Does anybody buy that? By the way, is that an acceptable answer to anyone sitting in that gallery?
Well, people can't exactly shout out or anything, right? So you listen to the arguments and they just go from there. She said, quote, "It's the government's responsibility to protect both the vulnerable and those outside the category, and I have no reason to doubt that Public Health England will provide the appropriate advice to the government to ensure the health and well-being of the prison population." She also then says later on, after a warrant was issued for his arrest, he remained unlawfully at large for many years. He has every reason to try and abscond. And there's substantial grounds to believe if I release him today, he will not return to face his extradition hearing. There are no conditions that could allay this concern. This application for bail is therefore refused. Right? So that was the long and the short of it is he has a history of absconding. In terms of his health, okay, fine. The doctors say that they have concerns, but he isn't technically in that category. That category doesn't have one of those illnesses that makes him specifically in that category of higher risk. She notes the fact that the doctors sort of disagree, perhaps, with government guidelines. Okay, those are the government guidelines, which will be updated. She also noted the fact that that the government is looking at releasing possibly some prisoners, and that will be decided in due course, because that was said at the beginning, right, by the U.S. government representative. And she also said that, quite frankly, I don't think that if he's released, that he will come to court. I think that he himself has said, as we've seen in defense statements, that he would rather commit suicide than be deported to the United States. That shows that he will go to any measures to avoid, and I think that would include absconding. And so, for the reasons that I think that his health will be taken care of, and the fact that he will abscond because he has a past history of doing it, and I'm not convinced that there's any conditionality that he can be subjected to that would prevent him from absconding. So I'm refusing the application, and that was essentially that. Although I did say that the lawyer told me that they will appeal.
So one of the, I was just going to say, one of the big take-homes here that you don't initially notice at first is that the argument was made that the pandemic isn't bad enough yet. And it was made in more subtle terms and in a more affluent way than wording it like that. But the judge literally said, well, if it gets bad enough, then they might do something in some other building. And not that it's something that the attorney should have to worry about with filing papers with those people and pressuring those people. But that's something that we can do as individual activists and citizens, whether you're in the UK, Australia, or the United States. I believe she said it was the Home Secretary office. It was their decision to make. So to me, all that that's saying now is the course of action for the people on the ground that are currently in solitary confinement in and of themselves need to start contacting that Home Secretary's office and say, we demand the release of all nonviolent offenders, nonviolent, non-sexual offenders from the British justice system. Because otherwise, all of these deaths will be on your hands. Because if that's the argument that the judge is making, that basically everyone has to get released for Julian to get released, then that's them revealing their hand, so to speak, and saying, like, no, we're not going to do it here. But if this institution that may be more susceptible to public pressure than a hidden court inside of a jailhouse, I think it's worth giving a try.
One of the things that's interesting to me, and this was in, I think, our second segment of that clip, was the fact that Mo came out and said it, like, the press is going to hound the court to release the name of Julian's partner and probably the names of his kids, because they're going to come at it from a public interest angle. Now, these same press are the ones that have been, I guess, tactically ignoring what has been in the interest of the public for well over a decade now when it comes to Julian Assange. They're not writing articles day in and day out about what he's been subjected to. They barely touched on the things that he exposed, but they're going to sit there and make an argument that people need to know what, you know, his partner's name is or what his kids' names are. That's especially disturbing to me. But you're right. The casualness of the way that Vanessa Brayster kind of says, well, we trust the public health service, the NHS. We trust them to let us know when enough of our inmates have died or enough of our corrections officers have died. And then maybe we'll start to think about following their guidelines to let out some prisoners for this.
And this is something that I see here in Ohio too. And I know I talked about this on either the previous vigil or the one before, but the state of Ohio started releasing their nonviolent, non-sexual offenders. It's up to each county, but the state apparatus of the state of Ohio here in the U.S. did issue that directive for judges to start reviewing cases. I have a personal friend of mine whose significant other is in one of these prisons where people are getting released who are nonviolent offenders. But there's this big caveat here in the U.S. that got placed on nonviolent, non-sexual citizen offenders, where there's millions of people in the United States that are facing federal charges for the crime of existing, being illegal on stolen land. And those people aren't getting released unless it comes from a federal directive, just like how Julian won't get released unless it comes from a federal directive in the United Kingdom. So the parallels here is they're willing to let people suffer and die in jail as long as it serves them politically and serves their motivations. And I think that that's something that this whole court case really drives home. But to the point that you were talking about, Steve, it basically sounded like a threat to me. Because I actually found this while it was being live tweeted out, that they were basically threatening to release the names of Julian's children and threatening to release the names of Julian's partner, because it wasn't so much that they have to do that, but it was that the U.S. government and the judge were basically saying, hey, if you want this, then this has to be on the table, and we have to be able to tell people these things. When it, at the end of the day, has no bearing to his case whatsoever, because they even said he could be ankle monitored and GPSed in a way that if he were to leave the interior of the house, the authorities would be notified. So I think that that's the fact that they want to hang these people over the court trial and say, well, we're going to tell them who they are if you don't comply, or if you ask for this again, these names might have to come out, is just insane to me.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, it's quite cruel, to be honest, and unnecessary that they reveal that information. They know that that's going to put their lives at a huge, huge risk, and their well-being at a risk.
So we're gonna go ahead and wrap here very soon, but I do want to drive home the point that right when I started that last segment of the clip, you heard Mohammed Almazi say that she denied him immediately, and she started in on her reasoning from a prepared statement. That she had already had time to view some of the arguments the defense was going to make, and had all the time in the world to be dictated to by the U.S. State Department and the Crown Prosecutorial Service. She was ready to go the moment they rested. Which to me shows more of the complete, total, all-encompassing contempt that the magistrate's court has for Julian. I don't know how there isn't a petition every day to have his entire case moved, or the entire, like, everyone who's been a magistrate, everyone who's overseeing it, as well as the Crown Prosecutorial Service, have all of them removed and start well and good, if not over, with better judges, a mistrial, a dismissal, a get the fuck out of our court system. We're sorry, expect a check.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There is right now a petition on change.org that was created by the DEA, Don't Extradite Assange campaign. Now, that was for him to be released from prison, and it was created before this bail hearing took place, but I imagine it's still up, and I'm not completely sure about that. I'd have to double check, but I think we're nearing the conclusion of tonight's vigil. If we want to go around and give some final thoughts, I first want to thank our guests for joining us this evening, Krish Mohan and David McBride. A big thanks to them for taking the time to join us. Always a pleasure to have Krish on. He's a returning guest, and it was great to have David McBride on for the first time. I foresee him coming on in the future as well. Thank you to everybody who is watching right now and supporting us. And tomorrow morning, I will be on Fault Lines Radio with Lee Stranahan and Garland Nixon. That is at 8:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so do check that out if you're interested. I want to thank Josh Benton, our tech support, and Kimber Maddox for all of her help with graphics and organizing. Thank you guys so much. There's a lot going on behind the scenes here, and we're really grateful and thankful for all those who are involved. If you do not know who I am, if you're watching for the first time, my name is Taylor Hudak, and you can follow me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. My name is Andrew Smith. Zigman's the middle name. I just want to say thank you to everyone who was watching out there, who was live tweeting this out. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that little bell notification on there. And spread the word about this, because we're probably one of the best kept secrets on the internet at this point, and the censorship doesn't make it any easier. So yeah, just thank you all for watching, and thank the people behind the scenes that really help out to make this happen.
Hey, awesome. I'm not muted. My name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it here on the YouTubes if you type in Slow News Day podcast into the search bar. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, I will be joined by Elizabeth Voss. That is going to be another fantastic show. She always brings just so much to think about. And the last time that she was on was right after she wrote an article called "It's the DNC Stupid." And here we are in the middle of a pandemic where just last week Joe Biden was telling people to go out and vote, and now he can barely form a sentence. Little bit of precognition there. Later on in the afternoon, I will be joined by Heaven Boynitzky. She has been doing some incredible investigative journalism on the COVID-19 virus. So that will be a fascinating conversation. Yeah, thank you very much for being with us. Thanks to David McBride. Thanks to Chris Mohan. I'm going to try and follow up and get David on Slow News Day here soon. Thank you to Sleepy Dirty Josh, and thank you to Mean Panda. Love you guys. And yeah, till next time. Good luck to us all.